yeah, on YouTube. There we go. So you guys should have a notice that we're officially recording now.
Yeah, just got that.
All right. So yeah, we're recording. Yeah, we're recording. So yeah, I hope that's okay with everybody. If somebody has a problem with it, let me know. I can always edit out anything in case we need to edit anything out. I don't think we should, but who knows? Okay, yeah, all right. I think we'll get started, and then people will show up as they do, whatever. Okay, I think I want to start out by clarifying the topic, because it is kind of confusing exactly what I'm doing. I'm relating a lot of things that maybe aren't normally related, and so it may be kind of confusing. So what is the topic exactly? It's not. I'm not here to. That would be an interesting separate topic that someone else could host, but about whether or not God exists or whether or not heaven exists. Those would be questions about ontology, and those are philosophical questions, which somebody could do. That's not actually what I'm going to be talking about for the most part. It's about the concept of heaven, the idea of heaven, and directly and maybe indirectly about God. If there were a heaven, the question is, let me just read this little summary I have, and then I'll detail it later. The question is not whether God or heaven exists, but what, if they did exist, these facts or ideas would have to do with us, given the way we are or can imagine being, conditioned as we are by the universe we have lived in and are living in. So this is a question about, like, suppose there was a heaven, how could we relate to it given the way we are? And there's some reasons to suggest that maybe we'd have trouble relating, or maybe couldn't relate to it at all, for reasons that we'll get into in a moment. And these problems would extend even to secular visions of the future that don't involve God or heaven, but because there are thinkers who actually believe that it has implications for our notions of human progress. Where are we going? Are we going to a better place than where we are now? If so, how much better, and how much can we relate to those people who would be there in some future period of time, future generations, where things have changed dramatically from what they are now, and very likely humanity and human nature changes from what it is now. To what extent can we even imagine that, and even be concerned about it? Now, this has practical concerns, because, for example, and we'll get into more detail in a moment, but just to give you a quick idea, a lot of the concern about climate change has to do, or at least sometimes people say, it has to do with future generations. We may not be around to face the consequences of major climate change, but our descendants might. And should we show concern for them? There are some philosophical problems concerned with that. Not that we shouldn't, but it's just that the reasons we would give for why we should concern are actually pretty complicated. It's not as simple as people might think. And it has to do with a problem that called the non-identity problem, that is famous for going back to Derek Parfit back in the 1980s, who wrote a book called Reasons and Persons, in which he brought this up. He kind of revolutionized population ethics by asking a bunch of questions which lead to strange or seemingly strange conclusions that cause problems for us thinking about this seriously. But to back up, let's go back to the original. Okay, what I'm going to do is talk about, break this up into sections, and then pause afterwards, and we can talk about that, and then go on to another stage of it. And eventually I'm going to come back to this last question as I brought up. Okay, so how did we get to this topic? I hope people, there's a couple of videos I posted that hope people had a chance to look at, because in some ways they motivated this topic. One has to do one is a talk by Paul Bloom, who's a psychologist at Yale and has written several books on this. And what he does is explore, well, the topic that I'm interested in is the nature of pleasure. Are we, because many people, including many philosophers, have traditionally would say that human beings and animals in general are pleasure-seeking and pain avoidance creatures, that we are basically motivated by things that are pleasant and shun painful things. And it's not clear if you're a historian or a cultural critic, if you study past history, whether that really is true. It seems like that there's at least some evidence that we actually look for a little bit of pain in our pleasure, or maybe we actively seek uncomfortable discomfort and pain. And if you were to judge it, if we were coming from another planet, we were aliens from another planet, and we didn't understand the first thing about human beings, but we just looked at their behavior over time, would we guess from their behavior that these beings seek out pleasure and seek to avoid pain? They might have trouble inferring that conclusion from history. And moreover, as Paul Bloom points out, there's now, who studies people individually, he finds that, using modern psychological tools, finds plenty of evidence to suggest that that's not in fact the case, that we are not, at least not simply hedonist. It doesn't mean we avoid pleasure. It means that sometimes we wouldn't know what to do with a nonstop pleasure, which is at least the traditional conception of heaven was, at least I remember when I was a kid hearing, they would ask a question like, well, what is heaven like? I mean, assuming it's real, the idea that it's a place where everything is perfect, happy, everything is just nonstop bliss, no problems at all, struck me as kind of strange, because can we relate to that? Do we have anything in our experience, either here on Earth, that is like that, or in our past evolutionary experience that is like that? And I don't think there is. We have the concept, the very idea of nonstop bliss forever and ever is kind of strange if you think about it. We don't have any experience of such a thing here. Neither from an evolutionary perspective, neither has any other living thing on this planet ever existed in a place that's like that. The history, both prehistory and recorded history, is full of bad things, and somehow we survived, and here we are. And we were conditioned and shaped and selected, and our ability to every ability we have, if you believe in evolution, is what it is because it was selected for as a result of our past experiences. And if we've never experienced bliss, why on earth would we have the ability to handle it? What we have been conditioned to deal with is what the reality that we live in, the world in which there is pain and suffering and bad stuff happening, interspersed with periods when things are okay, or maybe even happy, or at least it's not nonstop pain either. We evolved to deal with the world the way it is right now, with all its all its defects and the good stuff as well. So a world devoid of all that bad stuff is, if you think about it, rather strange. Would we be able to handle it is the ultimate question. And so, I was originally started thinking about this topic in response to, there's a YouTube atheist activist named Alex O'Connor, who you can probably find on there. There's a link to in the write-up, and he was bringing up, discussing the traditional problem of evil. This applies to the Abrahamic religions like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, that believe that there is have some concept of heaven where there's no longer any pain and suffering. And the tradition, but one of the problems with the traditional problem with these type of religious views is that they posit a God who's all powerful, all knowing, and all good, the traditional omni traits. How do you make that compatible, that the existence of such a God, with the pain and the evil that we experience or see in the world and have experienced? Why the traditional problem of evil is, if there is such a God, why he would know about it, he'd be able to, or she would be able to do something about it, and would be motivated to do something about it, because they're basically good. So why is there bad stuff in the world? And the traditional answer to that question, or one of the most convincing ones, is that people give, that apologists or people who offer what they call in philosophy of religion a theodicy, which is a story you tell to make compatible evil in the world with this concept of an all-powerful, all-good, all-knowing being. How do you make them compatible? Well, one answer is that the world is actually better with some evil in it than with no evil at all. Why? Because they envision that evil provides us with opportunities to overcome things, and we become better, or we become educated as a result of overcoming the bad stuff in the world. And we become, if we survive it, we come out of it better, or at least we have the opportunity to do so. And a world in which nothing ever went wrong would be a less good world, a less desirable world, and under this understanding. So this is a justification for why there is, or a justification that's often offered for why there is evil in the world, that it's necessary for our moral development and improvement. We need some kind of challenges to overcome, and it's good that we have to deal with bad stuff. That's the explanation. However, that doesn't do well to explain what about, and this is where the picture comes from, those who suffer great evil, who will not benefit in any way from that experience, like animals and small children, who will perhaps die too soon to have any understanding of how on earth this bad stuff is going to do them any good, now or ever. So one objection to that justification for evil is that must show that there is no God or no heaven, because why are the innocent suffering? What good is it going to do them? And there was a paper by this, he's now passed away some time ago, a philosopher of religion named Terence Penellam, which I read a long time ago, who I remember he had a passage in one of his articles about having a dream that he died and gone to heaven, and that there was nothing but only animals there, or very few people. And it occurred to him that maybe that's what heaven is for. It's precisely for those people who will not be improved. I mean, will never be improved by the experience of evil, because they don't either have the wherewithal, the understanding, the development, and they won't have the tools to do it, because they don't have the possibility for moral improvement as a result of challenging and overcoming evil, because they're not equipped for it. In the case of animals, because they're not unable to do this. In the case of small children, because they haven't yet developed the ability to deal with this. So then heaven then is for them. But for the rest of us, for those of us who, that probably includes everybody at this meetup who's an adult and been through a few things, for us, it's not the case. According to this justification, we benefit from being in a world with bad stuff happening into it, because it gives us a challenge. It makes us, if it doesn't kill us, it makes us better, sort of, to paraphrase Nietzsche. So that is one, understanding of how you could possibly, there be a rationalization for why heaven exists, that it's there for those who will not be improved by any amount of evil that happens here. For those of us who are improvables like ourselves, we stand to gain from being in this world just the way it is, without, that's the theory. Anyway. So this is the traditional problem of evil, a traditional response to it, and a response to the response that, and I mentioned this as background because this is probably the earliest version of this. This is sometimes called a theodicy. But now this is, you might say, well, if you're not religious, you're an atheist and you don't have to worry about these things. But let me relate this to new worldviews out there that are atheistic, that don't assume that there is any heaven or God. they have visions. I mean, some of them, I'm not talking about everybody, but there are movements such as one of the most extreme versions of this is, which I've discussed in the past meetups, the transhumanist movement. And there's some serious philosophy going on behind that movement. Most famously, David Pearce, a British philosopher, talks about this. Pearce and company are atheists. They don't, assume that there's any God or have anything. But their goal is this: they're basically types of extreme utilitarians or consequentialists who feel that our goal in the modern world is to make literally the earth heaven, to remove pain and suffering from this world, the one we're living in, everywhere possible. And if we don't have the ability to do it yet, that's what we should be doing, developing whatever it takes to remove pain and suffering. That means all human pain and suffering, but any kind of suffering by any kind of sentient being, including animals. So, for example, they would say, and to use whatever methods we have or can develop, such as scientific or technological knowledge, such as replacing, for example, if we can genetically modify ourselves so that we don't feel pain, but still get the benefits from being notified that, say you put your hand on a burner, you accidentally burn yourself. Do you have to have that suffering to be informed that maybe you should take your hand off the burner? Can't you just be informed in a more civilized way than agonizing pain? Or that there's something wrong with you, you're having a chest pain, does pain have to be so agonizing? Because one justification or one explanation for why pain exists evolutionarily is that it helps us cope with the world. It informs us of important information we need to have about the world around us in order to take action that would save our lives or improve our situation. Or so if you accidentally touch a hot burner on a stove, that is supposed to save you from more, the pain is supposed to save you from more serious injury. But does it have to be so painful? Does any illness or anything have to be painful or disturbing or in any way psychological pain as well, to let us know to inform us that there's something wrong and some action we need to take? The transhumanists think that we can modify humanity in such a way that we don't need to have pain. It's not a necessary, important part of our development. We can have it, the positive aspect of pain, that is its informative virtue, without the unpleasantness of it. And we can do it by whatever method science and technology can devise, whether it's replacing body parts with non-sentient parts, artificial parts, sort of replacing or genetically modifying our biology, or through any psychological training, or any and all the above, and including methods which haven't even been invented yet to remove pain and suffering from existence. And they're not saying that we can actually do that now, or that we will be able to do so in the next 100 years, but this is their end game, their goal. This is where all human efforts should be directed. They see this as like a mission statement of a human mission statement about where we should be going. And we need to do whatever it takes to get us there. And they're leaving aside the practical problems of how far away we are from realizing such a thing, but they believe that that's what we're here for. Let me pause right here. And anybody have any questions about what I've said so far, or comments before I go on?
It sounds very familiar.
What?
It sounds very familiar.
It does?
I'm probably the only one who was born and grew up in the absolutely atheistic society.
Yeah.
And that kind of notion that we are the people and we eventually will create our own paradise without pain, which is absolutely unnecessary, and we will do it any way possible. Generic engineering, turning rivers backward, or saving the world. So it's kind of interesting. But otherwise, the questions are very universal and timeless. Yeah,
that's there's actually, as I said, if you guys are not aware of this, there's a link in the write-up to a long interview with what's his name, David Pearce. He's a British philosopher who explains how they see this, and as well as deals with objections, because there are objections to this view, obviously. One of the obvious ones is that we're never going to get to that point of eliminating pain and suffering. But that's a practical problem. Their response to that is this: well, why not? I mean, it's one thing to say that that it just is a matter of practice, we won't succeed, not in the near future, but in the potentially, they see it, unlimited future. At some point, that should be where we're trying to go. Anyway, Sam, Claudio, go ahead, Sam.
One question I have is if anybody can shine light on this, the standard formulation of the problem of evil. From what little I've done research into this topic, it is more of a kind of a medieval theological obsession of certain thinkers. So in other words, it is not something which is, as was mentioned, found across the Abrahamic religions. I don't think it is even a real problem for example, Levantine Christian scholars, much less in Islam or Judaism. So it seems to me it's a kind of a parochial problem, or at least the way it's formulated, and somehow people seem to project it, that this is like a problem that people all across the world have been, banging their heads against since time immemorial. So I'd just be curious if anybody can shine more light on that.
Okay, well, yeah, if your religion doesn't posit there such a thing as heaven, and there are, I think, some people correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that, say, Buddhism, for example, doesn't have a concept of heaven, and perhaps there are other religions, but certainly the Judaism, Islam, and Christianity do, and their typical understanding. I'm not saying there are probably different variations or sects of these religions that maybe don't or have a very different understanding of heaven, but I'm going with the most famous one, that God is all powerful, all knowing, and all good. And if he is those things, then why is there bad stuff in the world? And the response is because apparently a world with bad stuff in it is a better world than a world with no bad stuff in it, because it gives us an opportunity to exercise ourselves.
What about, I'm sorry, what about C.S. Lewis, how he said very well about pain, like why God puts pain in this world of children and innocent, I don't know, animals, whoever. And his description of that is that pain is a God's megaphone to reach out to people who do not hear God's whisper. No, I am of course saying in a metaphorical way, but people do not understand what's going on and what they're doing wrong. And eventually the pain strikes, not because God wants us to suffer. God wants us to realize and understand and correct ourselves. So it's not like evil, it's an instrument in God's hands. So it's one of the versions.
Right. Well, that's a view that a world with pain in it is a better world than a world with some pain in it, not nonstop pain. That would be hell. But a world with some pain in it is good for us, because it helps us develop ourselves in a positive direction. At least that's one view. Right, but some people would say, but wait a minute, the standard response to that from those who would say, but if God is truly all-powerful, why does he have to have this method of informing us? Couldn't he just make us all so smart that we didn't have to be, pushed, trained in such a painful way by the world? Can't we just be, from the start, get it all right from the start? Why did we, that's what, I mean, what's your thought to that?
In this case, we are going to the very deep and broad philosophical question, because does God affect you personally, or God gives us a general idea and we're on our own? Are we in some kind of frame that we have to choose between good, evil, right, wrong, or we have to every day be controlled and guided by God. So I personally believe that there is certain frame between good and evil that we are kind of acknowledge as people, but there are lots of things that we have decided on our own. Maybe you remember we're talking about climate change, but not long time ago, people were saying that they can turn the rivers backward, they can drought all the swamps because we do not need them, they can cut the forests, and it was good. It was for the good. The idea was always good. Now the other idea, let's shut down all the energy sources, let's just go back to basic. And again, we have that notion that it is for good. So basically, we all act in a way of goodness, right? I think nobody will say, neither politician, nor regular person, nor physician, that I do it because I want to create some pain, evil, and that's my goal. No. So that's why I think it's not really punishment from God. It's not really the desire to make us suffer. It's kind of correction in a way.
All right. Actually, that's a good point. I'm going to let some other people talk here for a moment, but I'm going to come back to something you said because it's actually been questioned, and it is that nobody, you said that, and you're not alone in this, many people think this, that people do not deliberately want to do pain, cause pain and suffering, but there's some scientific evidence that that's not true, that in fact we seek out deliberately pain and suffering, and we wouldn't want it any other way except, I mean, we'll get to that as an interesting topic later. Okay, but let me let some other people talk. I see we have Claudio, Michael, and Mike, and William, and Vincent. So Claudio, I hope I got the right order. Go ahead, Claudio.
Yes, traditionally, the view towards suffering, evil, is due to the is seen as the original sin, what happened in the Garden of Eden. Nothing to do with like evolution, and also Satan was brought into the picture too. That Satan is also responsible for the evil and the suffering in this world. So this notion that bad things are necessary for moral development from the Christian viewpoint. Correct me if I'm mistaken. Maybe that's the minority view. The majority of Christians don't believe in theistic evolution. Now, those who believe in theistic evolution will argue, yes, the problem of evil can be reconciled with evolution. That struggle, suffering, death, predation is all necessary for us to reach this stage of high morality and spirituality. But I believe that I don't know. Maybe is that the minority view or is that the majority view? Because most Christians, I believe, a lot of them believe in evolution, but only for the lower animals, not for the human beings. I see that more as a scientific argument that morality is based on our hardwiring. It's all biology, and it's based on our evolutionary history.
Yeah.
But then again, like even if like it's difficult to argue that God would. There's an example there about an insect, a caterpillar, eating the inside of another insect. Like that seems like unnecessary suffering. You know what I mean?
Yeah, what was a famous line from Darwin, who expressed his difficult. Interestingly, Darwin was not obviously an atheist. He, toward the end of his life, he became increasingly skeptical, but his wife, Emma, was profoundly religious, and he was deeply respectful of her view. In fact, he famously gave a manuscript of The Origin of the Species to her and said, if you don't want me to publish this, I won't. But she agreed to publish, even though she disagreed with some of the implications of what evolution seemed to lead to. But both of them, of course, were I think children of I believe pastors or something. They were brought up. They were deeply imbued in Christianity. Darwin kind of remained, I guess, agnostic, increasingly so as he got older. He didn't really want to be an atheist, or he said so in his thing, but the evidence he saw in front of him just kept on pressing hard on him and says, I don't understand how the world can be this way and there be a God of this description. They just don't fit. So that's where he stood. I'm gonna let Michael talk a little
Very
bit.
common.
Yeah. There's another way to a way to look at the reason why we have these dysphoria, unpleasant feelings. And this is, well, take depression, for example. A person is depressed. That's a miserable state to be in. Why do people get, why does it exist? What purpose does it serve? Well, one way to look at it is that the depression tells you that something is wrong in your life. That there are things in your life, many things, and you don't have the right combination. So you're in danger of, your survival is not guaranteed, is in trouble here. So, but the body tells you that. The body, with depression, the body tells you what's wrong, but the body does not tell you what is wrong. You don't know what is wrong because the body doesn't know. It's just that circumstances have put them in a certain state, and they know they're in the state. You're conscious of the state, but you're not conscious of what produces all of that state. Is it the food you're eating? Is it you're eating some kind of poison, and that's making you depressed? Is it a trouble with your family, trouble with your friends, trouble with putting food on the table, worried about putting food on the table tomorrow? It could be a lot of things, but your body is telling you, look, something is wrong. I don't know what it is. Go out and figure it out. And until you figure it out, I'm gonna be shocking you. And you're not gonna like it at all. Now,
Okay.
The obverse of that, is, why do we feel joy? Why do we feel euphoria? And well, the answer is the euphoria, of course, is for immediate. The high point, the strong euphoria comes when we're rewarded for something. We have a steak dinner and bang, we feel wonderful because, but that doesn't last. I mean, it lasts maybe a couple of hours.
Okay.
But what happens when most things are going right?
Yeah.
In the background, you're getting along with your family. You've got a lot of friends. You're eating the right food. Just a lot of things line up. You're healthy. You don't have cancer. These things line up, and that produces an overall thing called eudaimonia.
Right. Okay.
Now,
Okay.
the eudaimonia.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
the background feeling of contentment and so on. That it's different than joy. It's different than immediate pleasure.
right.
But it's in the background. It tells you, look, things are going all right. You can just keep going down this path, and you can talk, and you don't have to worry about it too much. So you can put your time on something else. Figure out something else to do. You become the mayor or something.
Okay. Okay, Michael. I'm going to let somebody else talk. Mike, go ahead. Are you there?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to work this out, what I'm thinking here. But the notion was brought up that pain is necessary, and yeah, that's true. I think, but at the same time, I think some people are motivated to evil. So whereas there's a kind of a natural, it seems like there's a natural requirement to have pain and pleasure. True. But like in February, my car was stolen, my identity was stolen, Putin invades Ukraine.
Oh,
You just get this feeling that the world is there's some people are simply motivated to induce pain. So it's not just that I can kind of see that there's a natural need for looks like somebody needs to mute their microphone, but I can kind of see that there's a natural need to balance pain and suffering, good and evil. But at the same time, I mean, some people are just motivated to cause evil and pain, and that's where it's difficult to reconcile these things. So I don't really have an answer. That's just my thought.
okay. Uh,
Amazing. Can I say, can I answer, Mike? It's
Okay.
just amazing. You mentioned that your identity card was stolen. It's just such a coincidence. Last week, my wallet was stolen with my Mexican residency card, my driver's license, and it was unpleasant. Well, it's just trivial kind of unpleasant matter. And also the collective West, together with US, basically and finally made Russia to start the war. And that's how I see it. And it's very painful. And I see it from kind of different point of view. So I noticed that you guys kind of mentioned a little bit political situation. So I want to reply. I feel very sorry for the whole thing that happened, but I keep responsible the other side.
Okay. William and then Vincent. Go ahead, William.
Hi. I might not have completely got the nature of the discussion completely right, but my understanding from at least a Christian perspective, but it's something that I think a lot of other religions and other utopian ideas, and yeah, this whole sort of new transhumanism sort of philosophy kind of tries to get at is that, yeah, we can at some point somehow ourselves be sort of transmuted from our sort of mortal selves into an immortal body of some form, and that because of this, things like death will no longer be a problem, and there will not be any pain and suffering and things like that, which is somewhat of a different thing to, I suppose, you know, a constant elation and you know, excitement and happiness, which I don't think many, if any, of the world religions or philosophies actually, you know, talk about as having, as heaven, as being heaven being, or some form of, you know, golden age, as the Greeks and the many other ancient peoples have talked of. It's more of a case of that the reason we cannot comprehend these things is because we are still clothed, I suppose, as St. Paul puts it, in our mortal bodies. And that also means that not only mortal bodies, but our minds likewise cannot comprehend the nature of that transmutation. So even, say, for example, the what's called the transhumanists, right? Obviously, they talk of uploading their selves to, you know, some ether or some hypernet, or, you know, and downloading their consciousnesses to robots or some vehicle. that will make them eternal in some form. They won't, if your consciousness is going to be, that's so removed from a degradable, body that can feel pain and can suffer. Yeah, you will lose the ability to feel those things. You might likewise not be able to feel pleasure. So yeah, it's something that kind of keeps on rearing its head across time. This kind of idea, through different philosophies and different religions. Same idea with nirvana.
Right.
It's the similar idea.
Yeah. Thanks, William. Actually, you're verging on what will be kind of the second part of the discussion, is that, and that has to do with can we, in other words, supposing there were a heaven, would we have to become something that we aren't now to be able to appreciate it as heaven? And if we do have to become so radically different from what we are now, of what concern is that future person or being? That, in other words, the transformation from what we are now to something that can literally handle heaven. Why should we have any empathetic concern for that? Because you could say abstractly, if you say, well, if you're not concerned, then you're very selfish. You're only interested in the way we are now and not in the way beings that are related to us, future beings, future generations might be like, you don't care about them. But you do care about the future, about future beings, people, the people, if you have children or grandchildren or descendants, or even just younger people that who will be around after you're gone. Your concern, though, is not unlimited. Our ability to empathize both into the past and into the future is limited, is contingent. We cannot, it's very hard for us to feel the same thing for, say, our parents or grandparents than we have for our evolutionary ancestors, the dinosaurs, or the little mammals who survived after the whatever it is that killed off the dinosaurs. I mean, we can sort of, in an abstract way, care about living things in general, sentient beings, but the further away in time and space these things are, and the more different they are from us, our empathetic imagination begins to dwindle and wane to the point where it's almost an academic concern or an abstract concern about the well-being of dinosaurs. Do we feel sorry for them if they got wiped out? Do we feel sorry for, say, 1,000 generations from now, suppose the world ends? Do we spending much time now worrying about that, even if it's going to happen? And there's a finite amount of empathy. As the kinds of beings we are now, we have a finite amount of empathy, empathetic concern, which we tend to focus on what us here now and those that we know, or at least have a chance of knowing, and it just gradually wanes with distance, space and time, but also in likeness. So if you change the features of these future beings, or the beings of the past who were very different from us, the less and less it's difficult, it's hard, it becomes increasingly hard for us to care one way or another about them, except in some very weak, abstract way. In other words, too much change weakens our ability to be concerned about these matters, in a nutshell. But anyway, I'm going to go on to Vincent. Go ahead, Vincent.
Oh, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, I have quite a few questions, but maybe I will pose a few questions and then maybe even save some of these other more analytical concepts and issues for maybe toward the end, as maybe things kind of start coming together, as Victor kind of wanted to do, all these kind of different seemingly unrelated topics are kind of, coming together, especially as we started with this problem with evil, problem with heaven, which also leads me to maybe hopefully to express or wanting to clarify some kind of fundamental concepts typically in philosophy, especially if we're talking about something as the phrase pain is necessary, or the suffering is necessary, because, and you give like some type of explanation, right? So typically if we're talking about something as necessary, right? This is a distinction between something as necessary versus contingent. And so it's very interesting to even say the phrase as a basic assumption that pain is necessary for, and then you start to elucidate, further your claims, right? But in a sort of explanation about the nature of what is pain and what we're even talking about, most of those references to, let's just say I'm referencing a pain I'm having right now, right? The pain of squeezing my finger, right? Now you're going to say, is that pain necessary? And first question would be, well, necessary for what, right? It's necessary because it's sending a signal to my brain telling me that there is some type of problem. Not necessarily, right, the case that it's necessary to exist as a general existence, right? So we now have a kind of a problem of what are we referencing? Number one, are we referencing this particular pain that is clearly contingent on me squeezing my finger, right? So hence we have a contingency problem. And in that way, any type of pain that we reference, any type of example that you're going to reference, there's going to be, number one, the first of the contingency question, right? Is contingent on what types of factors, what types of actions precluded and came before that. And so therefore, to then say that pain is necessary, typically philosophers will say necessity exists because there could be other possible worlds in which some of the other same conditions exist, and therefore that existent, right, that phenomenon, right, pain, must also exist necessarily in that possible world, right? So again, we can possibly imagine possible worlds in which we might say, can that pain not necessarily exist if there is a humanoid creature putting their body into a fire, right? Because then what are we referencing as pain would be something of either the phenomenal experience of pain, right? Is that necessary to exist in any possible world? Or are we referring to just the physical phenomenon of there is some type of molecules and chemical reactions happening that create also other types of chemical, what become then signals, and I guess what might become information, and that information is then being sent up through a body, and then can also then become a phenomenon of avoidance, right? Because that what would be the phenomenon that we're referring to in this possible world, right? And this leads to that question that Victor pointed to, which I think is a fascinating question, right? Because if the transhumanists can say there's a possible world, right, in the future, the transhumanists want to create, that we can remove pain, and again, what is the transhumanist referring to as pain, right? Or is the transhumanist referring to the phenomenal experience of pain or the physical manifestation of what we then might reference as the chemical reaction, the physical reaction of what causes pain, right? Because it'd be strange for me to really think of an example of like, how can you really remove pain, the experience of pain, right? The signal of saying like, don't do that. That's been evolutionary created for me to say like, ow, that really hurts. Therefore, I will not do that again because I do not like that experience, right? The only way for me to create a value of attaching, I don't like that experience of pain, is to actually have that particular experience of pain, right? So what does it mean for there to be information that is exact same information saying to me, right, to my organism, of saying, don't do that ever again, right? Don't put your hand in the fire ever again because your hand will be destroyed, right? Mm-hmm. And if all I'm getting is I put my hand in the fire and I get this like, imagine some little robots going into your brain and delivering this little memo, right? Saying like, we have this memo that says you are now experiencing something that could, in possibly 55 milliseconds, could destroy your middle finger. That's really interesting. Do I really want my middle finger? Well, I guess, I don't know. Maybe I might use it to flip somebody off, maybe tomorrow. I could really use that middle finger if somebody really pissed me off. Okay, I'll remove my hand from the fire.
Can I answer?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, so I'm finishing.
Yeah, I just want to jump in.
That'll be my.
Yeah,
my
I absolutely
further
agree with you.
question.
We are talking about physical pain. And again, since we are talking about hell and heaven, and we are talking
Whoa, yeah,
about
I want to.
existence of our physical body and our powerful mind. So in this case, of course, we teach little children do not touch a stove when it's on, right? It's absolutely natural because child doesn't know it might touch and get burned. And as adults, we learn lots of things on a physical level, what not to do to make yourself physically hurt. Do not drink too much, do not smoke too much, do not jump from the 5th floor. It's obvious, of course, we learn, and sometimes by hard way. But I think on the philosophical level, and again, I am coming back to one of my favorite philosophers, C.S. Lewis, he was talking about the emotional pain, about mental pain. When you're losing your wife to cancer, it's not like your body hurts, but you feel tremendous pain and how you go through that. And then we are talking about hell and heaven. How about Dante and his Divine Comedy? He told us so much about hell, about all the 9 levels, and told us even who will be in what level and why, and very little about heaven. Like heaven is something like a bliss, which is the unsatisfied desire. And because it's unsatisfied, it's even more desirable. And I think, I agree with Dante in this case. He's, in a very poetical way, tells us that in our human intellect, because we're humans, we're in human body, and our mental intellect is obviously on human level, we cannot comprehend heaven. We can talk about hell because we created hell on earth. We know how to burn people, how to torture, we know about Inquisition and all that stuff. So hell is kind of more real, but that bliss, that unsatisfied desire of a complete happiness is beyond our comprehension. That's what I think the main question between good and evil, that we cannot comprehend good.
Okay.
Can I jump?
Vincent, go
Yeah.
ahead.
So my question before I want to stop you is that I'm questioning even the very distinction between what you are referencing as what is pain, what is any type of when you say physical pain. I really don't know the difference between what you're referring to as if I'm having a physical pain, it still is a phenomenal pain, right? I still experience pain as something that it is like to feel pain, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're teaching a child not to put their hand in a fire, that would be kind of strange to say that, like, the reason I'm teaching this child not to put their hand in the fire is because they don't know or they don't understand the experience of what it feels like to be burned.
I do not want him to be hurt.
No, but when we're not, so does the child not then experience the extreme pain of feeling the fire? So you don't have to teach a child to not put their hand in a fire, right? The physical experience of them being burned is going to create both the physical and the phenomenal, right? The very experience of pain itself. So it seems kind of strange that I'm not really sure what we are clearly referring to when we can say the difference between a physical pain, a phenomenal pain, and experiential pain or pleasure. It doesn't really matter because, again, what I'm asking is that how is it possible then to create an experience of the same informational impact, right, as Victor was talking about, as saying, don't put your hand in the fire if you will never experience the actual pain of putting your hand in a fire.
Right. If I could respond quickly to that.
Go for it. I'm finished.
I think the difference between, say, physical, emotional, or psychological pain is not, at least to this discussion, not really that relevant. It's the phenomenal pain. If it feels like pain to you, whether it's a physical or a psychological, then it's relevant. It's pain. That's what there is obviously a difference, but that's not really relevant to the. It's a bad experience, whether it's physical or emotional. But you did mention something earlier, Vincent, about the transhumanists, how they view their future state, their ideal state in the future is they point to an example. David Pierce, in I think one of the interviews, there's a link to it, uses as an example the feasibility of this idea, what they're thinking about. The difference is, how can you mentioned earlier about how can you remove the pain without also removing the important informational content that pain delivers to you. They believe that it is, I'm not sure they're right about this, but they do believe you can make a distinction. They use as an example the real case of I can't remember her name, but you can look it up. There's this woman in Scotland, who's been written up, and who has been just an ordinary woman who, by accident, her doctor discovered that she has no pain sensation. She does not feel pain. She's an elderly woman with grandchildren and everything, and she survived all this life without. She's known by all her friends and family as being a very upbeat, cheerful person, who describes. One time she describes actually leaning against the stove and burning her hand, but she had to be informed. She did not feel pain. She said she felt like a tickle, like something was up, but it wasn't painful. And somebody else pointed, "Hey, your hand's on fire," and she had to take it off. And in other words, what they're saying is that you can get information that's beneficial to your survival without the phenomenal distressing aspect of pain, in the same way that the way we can see with our eyes. I can see a color, I can see a threat with my eyes at a distance. It's not immediately threatening, but I can get the information without actually feeling a phenomenal, having the extreme negative experience. I can be informed of something bad without the extreme negative experience. And they believe you can separate the two. And they use her as an example of someone who has survived pretty much a lifetime by an accident. Her genetic makeup, which has been studied by doctors who are puzzled by this. They have seen other people with similar things, but what was interesting about her is that there are people who don't have pain sensation, and they're in danger of harming themselves by sheer not knowing that there's something bad happening to them because they don't feel the pain. She does seem to get information that something's not right, but without the really ugly stuff that goes with pain, the agonizing experience. And they say, well, whatever it is, genetic condition she has, can we induce that in people? Can we remove the bad part of pain while still preserving the informational content? And they think if we can, that would be a better future. We could genetically modify a few people so they don't have this bad stuff. The same thing with psychological and emotional pain. If you could modify you so that you're aware of something bad happening to she's an example of this. She apparently had a son who was beaten to death in a fight. He was in a band somewhere, and somebody in a band was gay and started attacking the gay person, and her son defended the guy and ended up getting seriously injured. She got taken to a hospital, and she was notified, and she went to the hospital, and she was asked about how you felt. This wasn't her pain, but the pain of her child being harmed. And she said, well, I was concerned. It was my son, and I went and did all the motherly things. But they asked her, well, how are you feeling about this? I mean, this is, and she says, oh, well, I was informed of it. I did what I thought was the best thing to do. But it seemed like the emotional trauma of having something really bad happen to someone close to you she didn't experience it in the same way that a normal person would. And some people actually see that as a moral defect. It's like they actually think that you ought to feel suffering and pain, and it's a good thing. And if you don't, there's something wrong with you. And they point to her and saying, well, but look, she's surviving quite well. She loves her. I mean, everybody loves her. She's a very lovable person. always upbeat. And she survived, and they said, well, why can't all of humanity be like her? That's an example.
Yeah,
You
and
really-
I see where the identity problem comes in, right? Because again, also that
Yeah.
moral judgment about, well, the reason there's something, maybe there's a moral defect, right, is because, again, similar to the Mary the neuroscience, Jackson's view about, like, well, you actually do experience something and learn something, right? Again, imagine you have Mary the neuroscientist, who's knows everything about neuroscience, but can't see red or any colors, right? And all of a sudden, one day, Mary sees red, right? And you're like, did Mary learn something or have a new experience, right? Even though you might say, like, was there the same informational content, right? The same identity in terms of what red is. And so, yeah, so maybe there is something about if you can deliver the same informational content and still it's more of like a practical problem, right? Can you get this person to still survive without that experience of pain, right? But your argument might be that this is a different kind of person, right? They are not the same people, right? That we morally, normatively identify as humans, right? That we are not the same kind of human, because if this human does not experience pain in the way that we do, even though they can still survive in the same environment with a different informational subsystem, then that's fine, right? That's just more of a engineering problem, right? That we're trying to figure out, right? But it seems like
you want to finish, Mike? Finish.
I wanted to make a comment about that.
Okay, Michael. I'll let you make a comment, but then we'll make sure that Vincent finished his point. You're done?
Okay.
Vincent?
What's that?
I think I'm generally done. I was just going to repeat.
Okay.
Yeah, but yeah, just trying to lead up to the next topic, which is that, yeah,
right.
So we're talking about the moral non-identity problem that we're trying to get to. So.
Okay, I'm gonna let Michael. You can say something if you can make it brief, and then I'm gonna go to Claudia and then Mike. Okay, so Michael, go ahead.
The structure that I gave about pain, the kinds of pain and the whole goal of it, I think on different levels, is both phenomenological and backed up phenomenal by what people say, at least, and also by physical measures, measures of the body. So you have immediate pleasure, and that's one thing, and and there are certain hormones that are released, and you so that you can differentiate that kind of pleasure from a mood, the overall mood I was talking about. And this is very clear when you study the hormonal system. The hormones are very much involved in this. They're involved in setting the mood when things are going well, and learned helplessness comes in. And learned helplessness you can look at behaviorally. You can look at it with the hormones. You can look at it with immediate pain plays a role.
Right.
You can look at it. You can look at it all these different ways, and and you still get this division. Now Skinner denied that. Skinner he denied that these states were important. For him, the only thing that was important was the sketches of reinforcement and the immediate effect. And I know that because I got into an argument with him about it. And we went over this I met about 5 or 6 occasions. We had these chats. And he insisted that he was very adamant. He was angry. In fact, he lost his temper because I can't, he couldn't change my mind about it.
Right.
What I'm advocating comes from Aristotle, of course. Okay. And it's you have these different levels. You have immediate pain, and that's physically and phenomenologically, etc. Clearly identifiable. You could clearly separate it from the others. Right. You have food, and you have
Okay.
the immediate mood, and then you have the overall,
Okay.
the overall.
Okay,
You
Michael,
know,
I want to move on because I mean
Okay.
you're raising some
Okay,
points
that's
about
it. That's all I have to say.
okay, yeah, you had, I mean, you're raising issues about pain, and pain all by itself is a philosophical topic, what it is exactly. And it really, for this sake of this discussion, all it matters is it's a bad experience, whatever the physical or emotional details are or how it works. I'm going to go to Claudio and then Mike and then William. Claudio, go ahead.
Yeah, I can see how like bad experiences, whether emotional, physical, suffering, whether it's fortuitous or not, it can help human beings or the lower animals, for example. It can have experiencing pain can have a survivability advantage. For example, if you put your hand on fire, you sense the burning, so you avoid doing it because fire can kill. And not just fire, there's other elements that can kill you, other things. And so being able to experience the badness, the phenomenal aspect of such things is important to survivability because we are biological systems, right? But keep in mind that 99% of all the species on this planet have become extinct, 99%. But if the transhumanists have their way, this is like in the distant future, if they're able to upload the brain onto a machine, right, a computer, or if they're able to make all our organs create artificial organs, then we can achieve immortality on Earth, right? And that would eliminate all diseases. And since since emotional and physical pain, according to many neuroscientists and physicists, have a physical component, emotional chemical like serotonin and dopamine, for example. Somebody mentioned depression, right? Then why, like experiencing pain would be pointless. It would have no survivability benefit. Because you achieve immortality if you upload your mind on the computer, right? So what benefit would pain have? Why introduce a piece of code in the program, in the machine, or some physical that will make the person who has been uploaded onto the machine experience pain? What for? What benefit does it serve? The information, why?
Well, it might prevent the machine from damaging itself to preserve its integrity. I mean, assuming
no, but once you do that, you achieve immortality, right? You're uploaded.
Yeah.
You have a way of overcoming those glitches or whatever. But also, from a Christian perspective, experiencing pain in order to achieve morality, that it's necessary. That's not enough because the most important aspect of Christianity and Islam is belief, faith. Morality alone cannot save you, according to the Christian doctrine, right? If the pain and suffering does not lead you, for example, to Allah or Jesus or God, then that morality is useless. And according to studies, bad events like natural disasters, like cancer, job loss, personal tribulations, most of them, they tend to balance out. For half the people, it leads to belief, but the other half, it leads to non-belief. So there really is no benefit. Like these are studies that have shown that like personal trials, or either individually or collective, like they really they balance out. They don't favor either way, either belief or non-belief.
Okay. I'm going to let Mike, and then William. Go ahead, Mike.
I think Claudio kind of covered what I was going to talk about, and that is the transhumanists seem to be interested to a great extent in human level AI. And whenever people start talking about human level AI creating that level of intelligence in a machine, there's a constant a constant conflation of human and machine. So if somebody talks about concepts, then you're never really sure whether they're talking about the human concept or the machine concept. And if somebody says, well, this abstraction in the machine or in the human, and there's this constant struggle with trying to determine you've got completely different substrates. A machine is a much different thing than a biological person. And yet, I mean, we're constant, especially if and I get into these discussions a lot, you're constantly trying to determine what, somebody says a concept. I mean, what the hell are you talking about? Some kind of bytes, or is it a bunch of neurons, or what? And so it's the same problem with pain. I mean, how are you going to implement pain in a machine? Well, you're not in the context of it having some kind of phenomenal pain. And so the transhumanists are conflating all this together too, I think. So that's just a consideration.
Yeah, it seems like the transhumanists have a vision of literally, well, maybe they're by deliberate. Maybe the very word transhumanism means literally something beyond and above and no longer human, but something that has in which humans may have a causal role in the history of these future transhumans. If you would trace where they came from, they could be traced back to us, but there's no identity. They seem to be open to the possibility you can break the identity, and they're going to be different things than what we are. In the same way, we're different things from our ancient evolutionary ancestors were. And if the difference is so extreme, because most of our ancient evolutionary ancestors, at least going back pretty far, were sentient. They had some experience of pain and suffering. Animals today do. But if you go back far enough to single cell organisms, the sentience drops out. It's not clear that sentience goes all the way back to the beginning of life. And perhaps it will not go into the future forever. And there will come a point in which some future development in which we play a causal role in bringing it about, ceases to have characteristics that we currently have, such as sentience, and moves on to something else. But then there's a different problem, which we'll get to when we get to the identity problem.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to let William, and then we'll move on to the next point. Go ahead, William.
Yeah, I was just wanting to agree with Tatiana on the Christian sort of aspects of it. In Christianity, everything is there is a spiritual realm. It has a completely different quality to this physical realm, and it works on a very different basis. It may interact with this realm, but it doesn't follow the same rules by any stretch of the imagination. So it's difficult for things like heaven to be comprehended in that sense. And the idea that there is suffering, well, I think in both Judaism and in Christianity, suffering is there. If you look at the book of Job, at least, it is a form of test, a trial from God, a trial of your spiritual, immortal essence, soul, and that is what will be judged as to whether or not that survives into eternity, rather than it being a case of there's thinking about these things in a very matter of fact and scientific and materialist way, which those things all may be well and true, but nonetheless Christianity doesn't, and to a certain degree Judaism holds to that the material realm is the be all and end all of reality and existence. So
Yeah.
So comparing the physical realm to the future spiritual realm is sort of very difficult to say, okay, this and this kind of cohere,
Right.
or can be compared even.
Right.
So,
Well, thanks, William. I think you raised some interesting points, but like, well, this is going to lead into the non-identity problem, which I want to explain in a minute. But Mike, did you want something to say again, or before I?
Sorry, I just have to take my hand down.
Oh, okay, okay, all right. Okay, I'm going to move into what I think is the real problem here, and then we can open up the discussion again. I want to talk about the non-identity problem for those people who aren't familiar with it. There's some, well, but you know, those videos, I put up a couple of videos, one by Paul Bloom, which is a psychologist who studied, again, I mentioned this at the beginning, that he doesn't think that we are fundamentally, that it's part of human nature that we, as much as some people think, including some philosophers, that we are actually hedonists. He actually thinks that we wouldn't, as we are now, wouldn't be happy in heaven if we were offered the opportunity to go there, at least as described traditionally, unless, I mean, there are only so many logical possibilities. Either heaven is complete non-stop bliss forever and ever. We have no conditioning to suggest that we would know what to do with that, since the world has trained us to how to handle such eternal bliss. Or heaven is sort of like more of the same. Heaven maybe is just like Earth is, but with a little less bad stuff, but more good stuff. Is that what a concept of heaven is? Then that sounds a lot like what people who believe that, well, we're making progress in that direction. We're slowly curing diseases and lengthening people's lives and reducing poverty and all the bad stuff that people are very optimistic. Those who are optimistic about the direction we're taking now, then they're saying we're slowly inching our way toward that future of, if that's your conception of what heaven is like, not eternal bliss, but better than this world, you know, progress. Or the third possibility is heaven is inconceivable by any measure we have now, because as somebody suggested, Tatiana, I think it's somebody else, that why doesn't Dante talk more about heaven? Because, well, what is there to say about it? Eternal bliss is the closest we can come to saying, but we don't understand eternal bliss. We have no reason to understand it because we never experienced it. So it must be some state above and beyond anything we have any experience with, either in history or prehistory. And then that raises the question about, well, why would we even be interested in something that's totally beyond anything we can even imagine? Why are we concerned about such a thing? Now I think I want to talk about the non-identity problem, because this is where it actually connects. First of all, what is the non-identity problem? There's a couple of short videos by Molly Gardner, I believe she does. You can also find lots of information about this on YouTube if you want, or all over the place. But I think she does a nice job of explaining this, you know, the idea for people who've not heard about it. I think it's good to start with some examples. The example she uses, and I think she borrows this from Derek Parfit, who sort of invented the problem. Suppose there is a woman, there are two women she compares, I think Alice and Barbara. Forget about their motivations, but they both want to have a child that is going to be disabled and going to experience some physical problems, illnesses, that it's going to make their lives less than optimal, less happy than most of us were. This is what they want in their unborn child. One of them does it by taking some pills or medications while she's pregnant that will result in her child having these defects. However, in both cases, by the way, that I'm going to be talking about, the children's lives will still be worth living. They won't be on average as likely to be as happy as most of us, but they're not going to be horrible lives either. So she takes some pills, Alice does, that are going to cause her child to be born with some disability, that are going to cause it to spend more time in the hospital and be ill in the future of life. And we know in its future life. And generally speaking, we say about that person that that was a very bad, she was doing something really bad. Compare her situation with Barbara, who's the same situation. She's going to have a child, but wants to have a child with the same debilitating conditions, less than optimal, but not so horrible that the child's life isn't worth living. It's still going to be a worthwhile life, just not as good as it might have been. But she wants to accomplish that in a different way. She wants to do it not by taking pills that would damage the genetic structure of her, or damage in some way her newborn child, but by genetically selecting for these debilitating traits assuming this becomes possible, before implantation, before she even has, in other words, by modifying the sperm and the egg so that the genetic structure, so that she gets the same result as Alice does. But, and we want to say, at least at first glance, you might think, well, she's also doing something bad. They're both going to, both women are going to have children that are less happy, less healthy, more likely to have problems than they would have had they not taken these actions. One took the action of taking some pills that would mess up the child that she was already pregnant with. The other one genetically chose the structure of her child, but before she became pregnant. So what's the difference? It seems like they're both doing equally bad things, but as she points out, it's different. In the first case, Alice is harming an already existing child that would, if she had not taken the action she did, would have resulted in a normal, healthy child. So you can say about her that she's called her child Billy. Billy's life is worse off because she took some medication she should not have been taking when she was pregnant. So she, in essence, you could say she harmed that child. In the case of Barbara, however, the result is the same, but there isn't a child there before her decision was made to genetically choose this future for this child. She chose a future for the child she was going to have, but it didn't already exist, like in the case of Alice. So in effect, in the case of Barbara, the things that are going to lead to her child's quality of life being poor are also responsible for that child's very existence. If she had not done what she did, the choice for let's say Barbara's child is named Tommy. Tommy's choices were either he exists the way he is in a less than with his problems, but still a worthwhile life, or not exist at all. The alternative is that she has a different child altogether, not that child. In the case of Alice, it's that child she's harming, not an abstract one. In the case of Barbara, there's no child. It could be argued in the case of Barbara, she's not harming anyone who exists, because there wouldn't be a child had she made a different decision. It seems on the surface that they both are doing bad things, but in the case of in the second case, it's difficult to put your finger on who is being harmed here. She's not harming the child she had because its alternative was not to exist, unless you think that existing is worse than not existing. And there are some philosophers who would say precisely that. But most people still think that a life worth living is still better than no life at all. So she's not harming the child she actually ends up having. But still people think she's doing something equally bad as the first woman. So and the reason that is given is because the child that Barbara has, she actually has, there's no one there's no being there that exists beforehand that ends up being harmed after the fact. The very act she takes brings about the existence of this child. You could say that, but it still seems like the world is a worse place because she made the decision she made, in the sense that there's now one more disabled child in the world than there would have been otherwise. But was she harming the world, the universe? is a worse place because of the decision she made, but she wasn't harming that child. In the case of Alice, it's very much more clear cut. This is sometimes, and to apply this, the very same idea to a grander situation, think of climate change. Many people think that we should be motivated to take major, alter our collective behavior as a human race, as humanity as a whole, in order to make the world better for people who aren't even born yet. We may not experience the bad stuff involving climate change, but future generations will, and actions we take now will affect them. So, the non-identity problem suggests that whatever actions we take now, whether we take actions to radically improve our treatment of the environment or we don't, different people in the future will exist as a result of that decision. In the same way that with Barbara, if let's say we don't do anything about the climate, we just keep doing what we're doing, then because it's such a major thing, the conditions of the world will result in different people being born in the future. They don't exist now. We're not harming anybody who exists now. And the people who will exist in the future, assuming any of them do exist, they're not being harmed either, because they are going to result from whatever actions we take now. So their alternative is not to exist at all. It's not where they don't exist now to be harmed. And when they do exist, their very existence is dependent upon what we do now. In the same way as with Barbara, the very existence of that future child that she's going to select for having disabilities doesn't exist now to be harmed. In the other case, in the Alice case, there are people. There's her already conceived child that she's going to harm as a result of her actions. But we're not. But in the case of climate change, we're not talking about people existing now. Maybe some people existing now will be harmed as a result of our climate inaction. But whenever we talk about future generations or future world being a worse place as a result of our actions now, it raises some questions about whether that's true. And it becomes especially important when we start thinking about ourselves and past generations. This is Guy Kahane, who wrote an article, which I have a link to, a philosopher at Oxford, applies this principle to us now and actions done by our parents, grandparents, and ancestors.
Bradbury.
Yeah, we right now, those of us who are living right now, are the result of all the past events that human beings have done in the past, our ancestors, their ancestors, and so on and so on. There's a lot of horrible things that happened in the past: world wars, plagues, pandemics, going back, even it just multiplies the further back you go. We exist because those terrible things happened. Because the Holocaust happened, many of us are here. Had the Holocaust or World War II or World War I never existed, we wouldn't be here. A different set of people would be here. So it becomes very paradoxical. Do we wish that those bad things in the past not happened? But we are wishing ourselves out of existence if in fact we have those wishes, because we are the result of all of that. And unless you're going to, because we weren't around then, and the very fact that we're here is a result of those things. Different people would be here than us had those bad things not happened. So this raises questions about identity over time. How much can we identify with future generations if those generations their very existence depend on whatever it is we decide now? This is one identity. There's actually multiple identity problems. This is the one that I'm talking about now, and then there's the one that I call it the ship of Theseus identity problem, going back to the old story about the Greeks brought up, where what happens if a ship leaves port and it has spare parts for every part of the ship, and while it's at sea, every part gets replaced, then it comes back in. Is it the same ship that left that comes back if every single part of it is different? And you could say, well, physically, no, it's not. But you could say identity might be a social construction. It might be, well, what do people say? If people say it, call it the same ship, it is the same ship. But then it's it's a decision we make to call it the same ship, but in a physical sense, it isn't. If we choose to identify with future generations, it may be a social construct. That identity is something we decide we are going to identify with those future people by fiat, because we say so, not because there's actually any, they don't exist now in order for us to identify with, and they're not going to exist unless we take certain actions or don't take certain actions now. And then but that's the Parfit identity problem. Then there's the Theseus identity problem, which has to do with how much can something change before our ability to imagine our being empathetic toward it. Like, this is what we were talking about earlier. How much, if the transhumanists change human beings to so that they don't feel any pain and suffering as we do, how much are we going to either think or care about those beings? It doesn't mean we have to not identify. It doesn't determine whether we identify or don't identify, but it does make it unnatural for us to say we care about these beings, about as unnatural as saying that we feel sad that the dinosaurs died. We weren't descendants directly of the dinosaurs. We're actually descendants of the animals that didn't die, the little mammals that survived because they weren't so big and didn't eat all these resources. And when the planet turned sour, the little ones survived and the dinosaurs disappeared. But it does, when you think of bad things happening in the past, you don't automatically think that your very existence depends on those bad things happening in the past. And so, anyway, this is I'm sorry, this is kind of confusing. There are two identity problems. One of them has to do with how much can something change before you cease to have reason, cease to be rational to say you care about it. Unless you're going to say, I care about every molecule in the universe, which maybe some people do, but most of us have, we seem to have a finite amount of concern that we can spread among everything, starting with ourselves, and then we expand beyond ourselves to friends and family, and then those people we can imagine who are alive today, and maybe were alive a generation or two ago, or will be alive a generation or two from now. We can imagine concern stretching out, but how much change can we imagine before we cease to care about it anymore? And if the transhumanists are right, and we alter the character, the nature of human nature for the future, what are they talking about? They seem to be talking about future developments in a kind of impersonal way, like in the same way that we might care about the universe after the planet Earth, after every living thing on this planet is gone. Do we care about that? It's difficult to stretch our imagination that far, or even just a few generations into the future. How many of us, how much time in a given day, or even during our entire lives, have we actually stopped and thought about our grandparents, what their life was like, or our great-great-grandparents? And how much time do you think our great-great-grandparents, thought about our lives? How many minutes of their lives did they actually think about us specifically 3 generations later? Probably very little, except perhaps in some very abstract way, like I want to have descendants, I want to be remembered up to a point, but it thins out. Our empathetic imagination thins out in both directions, into the future and into the past. And so what is the upshot of all this? Let's say climate change, for example.
Again.
Well, does this mean that we shouldn't care about the future of climate? Well, not necessarily. It could be one answer to this, and this is one proposed solution to the non-identity problem, is that we need to, one solution is that we, like take Barbara, for example, the earlier case. Maybe she isn't harming Tommy, the child whose existence depended on her decision, but she's harming a child, an abstract child, a child that would have been better. She's harming her child, the one she would be better off had she not made the decision she have. It is true that child that she does have, Tommy, assuming that's its name, wasn't harmed because the alternative for him was non-existence. But the world was somehow wronged or harmed in some way, though that child wasn't. Then this raises questions about, can you divorce harm? Can harm happen without there being a target, someone who is the victim of that harm? Can you have abstract harm floating around out there? Because it does seem the world is a worse place with her disabled child than it is had she had a normal child. But she didn't harm that child. Perhaps the world is harmed. But then that raises other issues, which we'll get into in a moment. There's something called the repugnance conclusion, which part of it. But I want to pause here and allow people to question and ask about what I've been talking about. Do you understand this, or should I go over it, or what? Anybody have any thoughts? Go ahead, Vincent. Vincent, yeah.
Sorry, yeah. Should we label, did you want to maybe like say like the two children, right? So like, let's say Tommy is the child that was
Barbara and Billy of Alice. That's what she
again,
does.
Right, yeah, just to help identify, is like, yeah, so if I'm talking about Tommy, I'm talking about the child that was genetically chosen specifically out of a pool of like, let's just, yeah, maybe it's even theoretically possible, like, yeah, a woman chooses to already have certain cells already like in vitro, right, implanted, right? So you had like, oh, now we have like these 6 children to choose from, and she's like, oh, okay. So number one is again, we label as Tommy, right? So it has a necessary identity. Tommy is the child that has these genetic features that Barbara is looking for, right? And then out of these 5, right? And then she's like, okay, now put that in me, and that's the one I'm going to give birth to, right? And then Billy was the one who was just the contingency of her, his or her identity, right? That Billy was contingently born, depending on which sperm happened to
the Alice and Billy. Okay, let's say Billy's the child of Alice. Alice is the first one. She took some drugs deliberately that affected the damage to her fetus, and because she wanted this. But it's their method of resulting in a child that's different. In one case, there was already something there that she damaged by taking some pills. In the other case, it was engineered from the start, to be a certain way. That's the difference. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I just wanted to just clarify that. So for the ease of the conversation, if we want to refer to Billy, Tommy, Barbara, and Alice, so we can make that easy. Cool. That's all I wanted to say.
Oh, okay. Well, that's what Molly Gardner uses as her example in that video. I mean, there are many ways to explain this. It's just in a thought experiment.
Yeah, right. Which both are great, right? Yeah. Both those videos.
The critical difference is, in one case, there was already a being there, the fetus, that was damaged as a result of actions taken by Alice, the mother of that fetus, that resulted in a disabled child. In the second case, Barbara's case, the result was the same, but she chose this result by genetically selecting for that result. So there wasn't already a child there to be damaged. It was created that way from the get-go, designed to be that way. That's the difference. And looked at from outside, it seems like they both did something bad. But the problem is that in the case of Alice, you can put your finger on who was harmed. Her child, that fetus, was harmed by her actions. In the second case, there was nothing there for her to harm by genetically choosing. It's like, imagine God deciding to create multiple universes. Did he harm another universe by not creating it? He created this one. The alternative for this universe is no universe at all. It wasn't like there's some other universe that was somehow suffering because he did not create it. This is it. As opposed to a case where there was already, I'm sort of suggesting God is sort of like a mother giving birth. There's a universe, God is pregnant, so to speak, and it's going to be a universe, and he's deliberately messing with something that's going to cause that universe to be less than optimal. That would be like Alice damaging her Billy, her already existing fetus in a negative way, versus the Barbara Tommy version where it's designed to be that way from the start. The result is the same, but there does seem to be a difference. And the question then becomes, can you have harm without a victim? In the Barbara case, it does seem you have something wrong happened, but no one you could say that's the victim. In the case of Alice, you can't say who the victim was. Is it possible? And some people think, yes, it is possible to have harm or wrong without actually having a victim. What?
I mean, it's interesting that again, referring to like without having a victim, it still seems to me that like it's a metaphysically necessary victim versus a contingent victim, right? Because you can still say, well, the victim is still going to be a victim.
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit. Yeah.
By a particular agent.
Yeah.
Is my
right. Yeah.
Sorry, I'll move. My internet kind of goes in and out.
Okay.
Seems like
yeah.
move on.
Okay, William, you have your hand up.
I think I don't know. My personal feeling is a false dichotomy, only because of there being it's potential people, all the time. So there's a potential me tomorrow, but there may not be. So in the sense that yes, you could say that the sperm and the egg do not constitute a person, but they're a potential person, in the same way that as I'm a potential person tomorrow, but I might not be, so I would say that it's a false dichotomy. I would say that choosing to have a child that is, say, for example, blind due to genetics, right? Before the sperm and egg have been fused, or choosing to have a child after the sperm and egg have been fused. The sperm and egg, you could say that they're apart and therefore it's not a person, but I think in some sense it is, especially if you are going to choose to fuse them.
Right. William, I think that
I might have.
The problem isn't that.
Sure.
Isn't that whether there's a person there? There's a person in both cases. Question is identity. Like, for example, yourself. Tomorrow, you probably imagine there will be a you tomorrow, and you make plans for tomorrow, right? And it matters to you that there will be a you. It's surely not a matter of indifference to you whether you are around tomorrow. So long as there is a person occupying your space and time, that makes no, doesn't matter whether it's you or not. I think most of us would say it does matter that it's me who's occupying, that I'm thinking about when I think of yourself tomorrow, not just a generic person, right? That's the problem here. Most of us want to say that we're concerned about ourselves tomorrow or someone we know tomorrow because we imagine that's identical with the person that we are today or the person we're talking about if it's not ourselves tomorrow. It's the identity across time, that is the question. That's why it's called the non-identity problem. It's not that there's a person. The question is, in the case of Billy or Tommy, who's the child of Barbara who did the genetic selection, that child, Tommy, that she had, you can't say that child was harmed. You can say her child, whatever child she had. You could say in a generic thing, there's a technical term for this called the de dicto sense. You're talking about whatever child she had, that child's life is worse off as a result of her actions than otherwise, but not the de re sense, that specific child, the one named Tommy, because for that child, the alternative, had she taken different action, is not to exist at all. Some other child would have existed, but not Tommy. So in no way can you say that Tommy was harmed.
Either way, I think it's a case that the person in question who is either is born with a disability or it's been inflicted upon them, I think would only be harmed by the knowledge that somebody close to them has harm to them. If they are not in the know in relation to a person, that they know in the immediate time, then it's a bit of a muchness, and life is just life as it always has been, and they know no different. So people in the future, who live, with rising sea levels and all that kind of thing, it's just, they're not going to feel much loss for the fact that certain cities, went underwater,
Right.
because they never lived in them.
You're right, exactly. I mean, this raises another issue that I call the acclimatization problem, that suggests that whatever, I think Wittgenstein made a remark about this, it's that whatever world we live in, we are acclimatized to it. We get used to this world. And if it were different, we would have gotten used to that world. And whatever world we're in, we're going to see it as this is the only one there is. Philosophers can talk about possible worlds, but they're possible, they're not real. We don't live in those worlds. But if you take that seriously, then there's no, then what's your motivation for doing anything about tomorrow or making this a better world, since there's going to be a world tomorrow, whether you do anything or not. So
can I comment on this?
Go ahead, Tatiana.
First of all, well, I hope that this example about the two women and two supposedly children is hypothetical, right?
Yes,
I hope, because in reality, no woman in clear mind wants to have a disabled child. So it brings me thinking that this hypothetical example about absolutely ridiculous, it just makes me almost shiver with what you are talking about. Was even able to be this example because of the generic engineering, because of the artificial assimilation, which is from my point of view absolutely evil. Normal woman loves a man, he loves her, she wants to have a normal baby. Then we are talking about what do we think about future generation after us? Did our parents thought about this, or did our grandparents, or probably they didn't think much? I can tell you, my grandfather fought in World War II. Probably he thought about me, maybe not me particularly because I wasn't born yet, but it's kind of, we think. Then about connection. Do we have to think about all the molecules in the world, about extinct dinosaurs, or about maybe, I don't know, famine somewhere on another side of the globe? I truly believe we have to think first about your close members of the family, then about your community, then about your town, then about maybe your country. But it shouldn't be all over the world. And that's why whatever we are talking about now existed all the previous generations. All the most ridiculous ideas that people are throwing now in our minds about the identity crisis. What identity crisis? We know who we are, and we go through life finding better or worse about ourselves, but everything existed before. And what is the world? The world is a reflection of our imagination. You see it from your point of view, I see it from my point of view. Who said that? Ancient Greeks. And I think that we all long for perfect. Somehow inside, we long for perfect, and perfect is beautiful. Not just a beautiful face or cute some kind of image, beautiful in the whole meaning of this word. And we kept out of Garden of Eden. Remember, we started with heaven. We kept out of Garden of Eden because of our fear and our desire to make world better from our point of view. Like, obviously, all of us now have our our point of view, how to make the world better. And sometimes I think, thank God we do not have power to do it, because the world is good as it is, and we will live in this world, and something for better, something for good, we will try it on our own without the generic engineering.
Okay.
That's just my point.
Okay, well, thanks, Tatiana. You raised a lot of interesting points there, and there's no denying that what you described is how most people behave. Most people do care about themselves and the people near them, increasingly, but slightly less and less, the further away from your, and they have to, for whether you're doing this for because you believe that for spiritual or religious reasons, but evolutionarily too. I mean, animals do care about those near because they interact with them. The further out they go in space and time and relatedness, however, it becomes only a philosopher's problem. Only a philosopher would worry about future generations, a thousand generations hence. I don't think your multiply great grandfather, did he care about you? There's going to be a point at which you're going to say he had only the vaguest idea that there would be a
He
future.
didn't care about me. He cared about his children and grandchildren.
But
and
not
then
his
it was a
great-grandchildren?
chain.
But not his great-great-great-grandchildren? Did he, at a certain point, did he stop?
We do not think that far.
Okay, you're right.
Thank God.
You're describing, right. And we, for evolutionary reasons, we don't, because we wouldn't be able to function. We have to literally focus on a smaller world just to be able to cope with it. But to start thinking about beyond that is, but the transhumanists are thinking beyond that, because they say, look, where our technology, our science is enabling us to make, to take action, which will have very long-term consequences and affect.
Maybe it's evil.
Maybe
it's
it is. Well,
camouflage evil.
And their vision of what is good is, well, eliminate pain and suffering if we can. And if we can't now, let's develop the tools to do it. That's their marching orders, their mission statement, in a word. And it doesn't rely on there being God or heaven or anything like that. Their idea is make this heaven right here. Let's improve it beyond,
You look inside yourself and find heaven inside.
Right, but there's some paradox. There's a paradox involved there. The paradox is if we too much improvement too fast that we are not able to assimilate it, then we're not going to see it as improvement. We're going to say, like, what is that all about? It's not about us or anything we care about. It's about something else, something abstract. Anyway, I want to let some other people talk here. Vincent, Michael, and Sabrina, and William. Go ahead, Vincent.
All right. Hopefully my internet is not going to be mean to me.
Yeah.
Cool. Yes, but actually, I was going to say something going back to, I think, what William was saying. Oh gosh, I think I've already forgot. Yes, something about, again, the potential person argument, which again, if we kind of, as you were mentioning, this is more about the identity problem, or not necessarily about what constitutes a person and whether or not there is like something we should have a moral care toward potential people versus actualized people, which is would then be interesting about Alice's case, right? Because you could also make an argument that Alice's case, she could almost, maybe in a legal sense, be argued to be doing more harm, right? Because she is potentially harming more potential people, right? Because she doesn't know which quote unquote child is actually going to actualize. That means that she's taking these drugs that are going to cause whatever fetus actualizes to be in some harm, right? So therefore we get into these kind of fuzzy moral arguments about like, well, now let's make her even more morally culpable because she's harming more potential people, versus Barbara, who is only intentionally directing her harm, causing harm on one even more potential person, right? So I guess even Tommy is even more potential than Billy was, because even going back a little bit farther, we don't really know if Billy was going to be actualized, unless you're a determinist, right? And you can say like, well, it doesn't matter what Alice was going to do. Billy was going to actualize no matter what, right? Because due to determinist factors. it was already kind of predetermined, right, that Alice was going to take certain drugs, and therefore the fetus that was going to actualize predeterminedly was going to become Billy. It just is that Barb seemed to have more supposed free will or control over causing Tommy to come into existence. But I guess in terms of the legal and moral sense, I'm not sure anyone would intuitively say that, like, well, because Barbara knew that Tommy was going to exist and that she was directly harming someone that she already can identify, that means that she is more morally culpable than say Alice. But again, I think this leads to the problem that Victor is trying to get to, is like, what are the justifications for why it seems more intuitively different that maybe Barb is harming Tom more than Alice is harming Billy, again, because Billy, again, has no, there's no victim in Alice's case, right? Again, in the case of, say, like a drunk driver, right? I'm going to take a bunch of drugs and drink a bunch and get in the car, right? Which raises the possibility of a potential victim, right? And I don't know who that victim is, versus me getting drunk and then, you know, intentionally wanting to go attack someone who I specifically know. So yeah, I don't think those problems necessarily relate to whether or not then the problem is non-existence, right? It's like non-existence is one of the features that we say is itself causing harm, but also existence is causing the very existence, which itself is desirable, right? And what we're doing, it seems like, is that we're turning existence into a predicate and making predicate a moral feature, right? That is equal to any other feature, as say the predicate of I am having pain, right? Is a non-desirable predicate, versus I exist is also a desirable predicate.
Well, there's
yeah, I'll go into a few different places.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to talk about it here because it's actually a whole different subject, which I did a long time ago, and I might do it again because it's related to this. And the anti-natalists have an argument that suggests that existence isn't a good thing, that we would all be better off had we none of us ever existed. Or we'll put it this way, there would be no one who would be harmed if we had never been existed. But that raises up a whole,
right, because you can't say that there's right.
No one
You can't
there.
say that, like, I would not be harmed if I didn't exist, because we're already referring to in this world, right? Because in this world, actual world, Vince is necessarily me, right? The identity of me as me is a necessary condition, and therefore I can't not then say I don't exist, because I exist, and therefore how can we talk about non-existence?
Yeah,
as a harming predicate, right, in any type of expressive statement, without then saying that, you know, that's me, right? But that, as the prenatalist might say, is like, oh, no, it's just that anybody, right, all possible people would not be being harmed because no possible people would exist, and that is a better condition than existence itself.
right.
Can I ask one question?
Okay.
Absolutely hypothetical question. Imagine for a second that you individually have to make a decision to kill this particular child in front of you, absolutely normal child sitting on a bench, in case to save the whole world. Like the whole world will not suffer anymore. It's going to be perfect, no wars, no problems, no this pain, but you make a decision to kill this child, absolutely innocent. Will you take it?
Well, that's an interesting question, Tatiana, and that it's a topic all by itself.
You know who raised it?
You
know who raised the question?
No. I think we're good. What I want to do is this. There's some people with hands that want to let Sabrina talk because she hasn't had a chance to talk much, and then Michael, and then William, and then we'll come back to your question because you're if people want to continue. So I want to let Sabrina, because she hasn't talked very much. Do you want to say something, Sabrina?
Yeah, we make those.
No,
kinds of-
Michael, I'm gonna
Oh,
let Sab-
which Michael are you talking about?
I'm
No, you
I'm
can
gonna let-
go ahead, Michael. I can
Okay,
say something.
Michael. Okay, Michael, you can go ahead and talk, and then Sabrina, and then William. Go ahead, Michael. You there, Michael? It's you. Hello? Can you, Michael, are you there? Okay, well, looks like something is wrong with his internet. Go ahead, Sabrina. If he comes back, I'll let him talk. Do you want to say something, Sabrina?
Yeah, I was just talking to a friend about something like that just the other day, and she was saying that can we empathize with someone's struggle if we don't really relate to it? So is that the reason behind the choice of having like children who are part of that minority? In your case, the one you just mentioned about the woman who wanted to deliberately have children with disability. Was that the reason behind it? Because if we don't really struggle, if you don't relinquish,
No.
is that the reason behind it?
No.
It's more of a
Well,
than-
that example I gave about Alice and Barbara and their different ways of bringing about a child that was disabled is taken from the video that Molly Gardner does. And she's not talking about real people here. She says
yeah,
she just it's not actually relevant to what their motivation was. There are all people with bizarre motivations out there. In fact, I think Tatiana said earlier that no normal woman would want to do that for a child. And I certainly agree that 99% of people wouldn't want to have a disabled or intentionally want to have harm a child with disabilities on purpose. That said, the reality is that the people are complex, and there are people who actually, and I know them because for a number of years, I used to work along another life when I was much younger. I worked at a state institution, people with disabilities. And I often I worked with kids who were born with all kinds of terrible things from epilepsy to mental retardation. And I also met their parents. And there were striking differences between the different parents. Most parents, there's some parents who literally disown the child. They don't want to have anything to do, or even people to know that they have a relative who's mentally retarded or an institution. They let the state take care of it. There's those people. There are other parents who are very involved in their children, and some of them love their children more because they are less than perfect. They almost, in the same way that many people love pets and dogs, who like the dependency of this creature in their lives that depends entirely on them. Like if you love your dog, and it's for its entire life, it's going to be, and it's not a wild animal. It's let's say it's a purebred that depends upon you taking care of it. Some people love that experience of having an eternal dependent. The idea that parents might not want that with their children. They may not deliberately say, I want a disabled child, but some parents say, this is what I got. I have a disabled child. I love that child to death. I'm going to do everything in the world. And I'm very happy that child exists, even though it's disabled. Not everyone has this attitude. Some people consider it a real tragedy to have a child like that, but not everybody does. And some people it's not that they would intentionally bring about such a child, but many people have a very different attitude.
Do you need anything?
Yeah, this experience also happens to normal. Some women may want to have an abortion, but for whatever reason don't have an abortion, and they didn't want this child beforehand, but then they have the child for whatever reason, and their view about it changes. They now want the child that they earlier did not want to have in the first place, or a child that's born at a wrong time in a woman's life, that this is not the time to have a child. But the child happens, and suddenly their whole attitude to that child changes. All I'm saying is that it's not correct. Well, our attitudes to these things experiencing a bad having bad experiences can actually change as a result of having the bad experience. You can actually change your attitude, or its nature. Sometimes people do change their attitude to something, decide they want something they didn't earlier want, or think that, well, here's actually Paul Bloom talks about this in his, I highly recommend that lecture. He's think about people, bad things that happen to people that in hindsight you say, but in hindsight, that's the best thing that ever happened to me. He gives a real life example of this guy. If you guys remember the Boston bombing a number of years ago, where there was somebody who put a bomb in the Boston Marathon and it exploded and many people were killed and some were injured. There's a true story of a man who was very badly injured. He was in tremendous pain. It took him months of recovery. He was in the hospital. But while he was in the hospital, he met this nurse who he fell madly in love with. And they later got married. And in hindsight, he was asked about this. And he says, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. That he would never have met her, the love of his life, had he not experienced this horrible, and that's not something he would have chosen in advance, but that it happened. In hindsight, we sometimes tell ourselves stories to rationalize how we feel actually good about a horrible past experience. And he finds lots of examples like this where people will look back on a bad experience, and they wouldn't do this in advance, but after the fact, they find a reason to say, this was the best thing that ever happened to me. It's our views about pain and suffering, or if you guys watch that lecture, are really complex. There's not as simple as don't want bad things, or we do want good things. We kind of change our story about them depending on what happens. We wouldn't ask for this in advance, but after the fact, we can sometimes change our views. Anyway, so far, Michael, Sabrina, and William all have your hands up. Michael, are you still there? Did you want to say something? Are you still there, or maybe he's gone? Yeah, I don't. Okay, Sabrina, did you want to say something? And then we'll go to Tatiana, what she said earlier.
Just to finish this this I raised, because I don't know if I'm repeating myself, but when she asked me that question, that if we can relate to someone's struggles, if we don't if you're not really experiencing that struggle or something, going through that, and my initial response would be, yes, we can. Some people can, and others not so much. But can we truly, it's not really the same if it's not really close to us, is it? So I think I don't really know if I have the answer for that. Mm-hmm. It's just a question I'm trying to raise here.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it relates to what I was saying earlier about what I call our empathetic imagination, the ability to, how far does it stretch? How far can we, in theory, someone, and I imagine different people can stretch it further than others. Some people can, the extreme cases, what do we call them? Someone who's only concerned about themselves. I forget the name for them. The people call Trump this. Narcissist. Yeah, someone who's only concerned about themselves and everybody else in the world, including friends, family, they care about them, but only to the extent there's something in it for themselves. So they might care about you, but only because it's good for them. Then there are people who go beyond this and say, look, no, I care about that person over there for their own sake, even if it doesn't do me any good to care for them.
Well, you touch a point there that made me raise another question about the topic of heaven and hell. Isn't it, don't we think about heaven and hell out of self-interest as well? Because out of fear or guilt, perhaps, that if we don't behave in a certain way, we are going to hell, or for some religions that don't believe in hell, we are not going to heaven. Yes. So isn't that the reason that will make
Well, it seems to me that I mean, yeah, I think those are very simplistic reasons. It's like using heaven and hell like a disciplining tool. You
That
know,
is
like
a form of control.
but yeah, yeah,
I
you're going
used
to
to that. I
yeah.
used to believe that. I'm trying to question that now.
Oh, well, right.
Nothing like a black and white like that. But
Yeah, it seems to me that if you use it as a primarily a disciplining tool, that you said you behave or you're going to hell, or you if you're good, you're going to go to heaven. That understanding that, you know, that's a behavioristic, like you would reward someone or punish them to get them to manipulate them, to get them to do what you want them to do. If that's what the purpose of heaven, hell are, it makes it makes them into tools for manipulating ourselves. But the problem, the moral problem with that is that somebody who's trying to manipulate you to do something that way by exposing you to pain and pleasure, do they really care about you, or is it they want you to do something they want you to do? In other words,
it's a very good statement. Yeah, it's a very good statement.
Ideally, you would want people to do good things because they want to do them, not because you're forcing them to do them or scaring them into do them. So ideally, you want people to behave decently to people because they want to, not because you're going to beat them over the head or send them to hell forever. If that's the only motivation, that they're afraid of going to hell, why they behave themselves, then if they don't really care about you or anybody, they're still caring only about their future, you know, eternity. That's what they're worried about. They're not worried about you, whether you're harmed. And I think most people think that morality, or someone who's moral, is someone who does good for other people because they want to, and not because they're afraid that they're going to be punished if they don't. There's a difference between legal and moral. For example, the laws that governments make are like that. I mean, if you park in the wrong place, you'll be have a pain inflicted in form of a fine or something. Ideally, if people were always moral, they wouldn't need such laws, because they'd always be trying to do what's best for everybody. But we know that isn't true. Sometimes people do need a bit of you know, either a little bit of pain or a little bit of pleasure to incentivize them to do the right thing. But that's legal. Morally, we want people to be motivated internally by wanting to do things for the right reason, because they care about people, they respect other people and themselves and everything around them that matters. That you want that to be the motivation, not fear or punishment. At least a more advanced. Go ahead, Tatiana.
There is a difference between religion and religious institution. So whoever is punishing you with hell and heaven, whoever is confusing little children that if you do this, God will do it to you, they are not really on a level of spiritual, philosophical, religious teaching. So that's why I heard those notions about, oh, when I was a child, they just totally turned me off from the religion. And believe me, I grew up in an atheistic society. They taught me exactly opposite. They were telling me that absolutely illiterate, old, unfortunate people believe in God, in such a nonsense as hell and heaven. So how it happened? The propaganda was very strong. It was as strong as from the other side in some other part of the world. And then you mentioned about manipulation. You know, they want you to believe in God and be punished by hell and manipulate you. I'm not sure. I mean, I am sure, but I'm just throwing this question to you. When they want us to believe in climate change, do they really care about us? Or they want us to do something, or they want us to take sides, or they want us to be on one part of the geopolitical camp or the other, and what's going on. Like we are right on the surface, and everybody with our own knowledge and emotions and political views. So I see as a little bit outsider in the US, and already outsider from the eastern part of the globe, I see both very strong powers are trying to manipulate it on all the levels. And it's up to us, again, individuals, to find a way and not to just follow the mainstream propaganda. Either way it goes.
Yeah, thanks.
Well,
for
when it comes to climate change, I would go as far as to say that people are doing something about it now because it's really hurting our pockets. It's mostly like a financially the reason like behind it, because people are really feeling, right, the pain now.
Oh
The
yeah.
financial pain.
And you know,
So-
the whole Europe will freeze this winter. I do not know how they will go through the winter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry for that.
I think Michael, you had your hand up for a bit. Do you want to say something? And then William, go ahead, Michael. Are you there? Can you hear me?
I don't think he's there anymore.
Well, I see your picture, Michael. Can you hear me? Your mic is off, Michael. I can see you, but I can't. But your mic is off.
He might be watching something else.
Oh, okay. Well, all right. William, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, there's all this kind of talk of heaven and hell and all this sort of thing, and sort of empathy and reciprocity and things like this. It reminds me of a description of the difference between hell and heaven. I think that's found in the Jewish tradition, which is that difference between hell and heaven is that both are found, both are individuals at a banquet. The people in heaven are given very long spoons and forks so that they cannot feed themselves, and the people in hell likewise are given very long spoons and forks. The people in hell try to feed themselves and always fail to do so, and therefore they're tormented by the fact. However, the people in heaven feed each other. So you know, it obviously for you feed the other person for personal gain too, in as much as you give to others, and insofar as they give to you, and there's a reciprocal arrangement, and that is a sort of a bliss, isn't it, in a sense? But if you're always just trying to struggle on your own, it's not going to work out very well for you, especially for very difficult situations and problems that you might face either in life or in the hereafter. And sometimes you have to be empathetic in order for things to go well with you. So yes, you could say, the person in hell could say, well, it would have, would the person in hell get used to the facts that they cannot feed themselves? Yeah, probably. But they'd always be looking down at the food and saying, I could be eating this, but none of my compatriots are wanting to lend their their empathy and their resource to feed me, and vice versa. But yeah, I just think that maybe something can be learned from that. I don't know.
Thanks, William. Actually, your comment about that little story about people in heaven having the long spoons so they can, and then they feed each other. People in hell try to feed themselves, but are frustrated because they can't. The spoon is too long for them to feed themselves. So their selfishness is causing them distress and suffering. Right? That's the idea. The thing is that conception of heaven actually is not the bliss one. For one thing, in that heaven, people are hungry, that they need to be fed at all is already not heaven in the bliss sense. But it does sound like something closer to a practical, like what they're really talking about is this world. That in this world we ought to be taking care of each other, and there's so really that notion of heaven is more like a version of this world, but a better version of this world rather than a world of bliss.
I would say, even from a Christian perspective, even if you look at the descriptions of heaven in the Bible, it talks about people eating and drinking. Even the original, some say, is the original translation of descriptions of heaven in the Quran, talk about, it's about likewise eating and drinking, being able to drink wine, which was something that's denied.
Is
So
there
obviously
is there sex in heaven?
In
In
Quran.
well, I mean,
In Quran,
well,
definitely.
in the original, some say the original translation of the Quran does not mean what it says, and the translation is obscure and may have originally come from a Christian rendition of a text, and it's about where people will eat grapes, and that was translated into some form of, gets 72 virgins or something like this. But it's obviously Jesus describes in the Gospels that, some people come up to him and say, this lady's had X number of husbands, whose wife will she be in the kingdom of heaven? And he says, well, people will not be married or be given in marriage, or they will not have spouses, because in heaven they will be as the angels. So
Right.
Obviously it seems to be the case, at least in the Christian rendition, and if that is original to the Jewish tradition, the ancient Jewish tradition, yeah, there's no mortal body, there's no reproduction.
Right.
There are a finite number of spiritual beings in the universe.
Right. So none of the normal bodily functions like eating, drinking, none of that happens in heaven, because there's no need for it. Those are bodily physical things.
Well, I mean, that's not how the Bible describes it. If what they mean is a spiritual kind of eating and drinking, it says, come to me, and be, you will be, your thirst will be quenched, right? Talk about the river of life, and all this sort of thing. So there is some element of eating and drinking. But
Are they speaking like metaphorically or something?
Probably, highly likely, yes.
They don't mean
but
literally.
But then there is no body. People will not have bodies as we know them in the religious senses of the terms.
And I guess none of us read Bible in original, and how much we lost in translation. And remember, last time we talked about Contingency and about his philosophy, linguistic philosophy. That combination of words doesn't really mean that you see it right away. Close the window is not just close the window. It might, maybe I'm cold, close the window, or maybe it's too noisy outside, close the window. So imagine how many hidden wisdom and completely different meaning in those come to me who are thirsty. Do I give you water? Of course not. I'll give you something more than that. I'll give you bliss. And whatever is going in heaven is not exactly what we imagine is going on earth. So that's why, I always feel like people were dedicating their own, like the whole life by trying to decipher, trying to understand and learn and being confused to understand those very serious, fundamental religious and spiritual subjects. And it's fun what we're doing, but it's much more behind. But it's already good that we can talk.
Okay, good. Michael, are you back? Can you hear me? Did you want to say something, Michael? Your mic is off. Maybe you can't hear us, but all right. Vincent, you want to say something?
Oh yeah, thanks. Sorry, I was now looking up a whole new other. There's and I'll maybe find this later. There is a form of a crab, again, that doesn't necessarily, they think, feel pain, in the same way, and it doesn't like have like the flinch reaction that we sometimes also think of. Like, obviously, if you have the phenomenal experience of pain, or even just physical pain, whatever you want to call it, you're gonna have that like flinching reaction, right? That you actually will immediately sense it, right, and have that reaction. But I'll keep on looking. This is actually from a really great book called Metazoa by Peter Godfrey Smith, who was a philosopher of mind and biology. Yeah, his expertise is philosophy of biology, which itself is his own specific thing. But sorry, that's another issue. What I wanted was to talk about one of the solutions to the non-identity problem that I believe that Molly Gardner advocates for, which is that maybe this is even what a lot of your kind of narrative is kind of leading up to, right? If we look at Paul Bloom's analysis, and we are already kind of deconstructing this idea that we even have a very clear understanding about what the normative aspects of pleasure and pain are, meaning that something, whatever we want to call something that we avoid and we don't want it, that's called pain, and whatever that we want and try to go for it, we call pleasure, right? Because Paul Bloom is like, well, what about those things that seem to be what we might label as pain-causing phenomena might also give a pleasure response, right? Like, the example he gives of like eating a bunch of chilies right while we're out. Those guys swimming in the bath of very hot, peppers and chiles and stuff like that, right? So again, it's that if he's deconstructing this notion that there really is no clear argument that we can give that we have some type of essential nature of hedonism as human beings, right? What that perhaps does, again, is going to lend credence to an argument against any type of moral theory that privileges utility or pleasure, pain, suffering as the criterion for determining when an action or behavior is right or wrong, right? Because again, this would then perhaps solve the non-identity case of Alice and Barbara, right? Because if we avoid using any type of language of the harm principle, right? It's like, well, if we can't talk about harming someone who there is no case of a victim yet, or you can't be blamed for harming someone who doesn't have the same identity as the action that, or does have the same identity as the action that actually brought it out, and therefore existence itself is a pleasure predicate, then there really is kind of like, we have to give up something, right? She lists those 5 premises that you either have to like reject one, right? And so it seems like that would be a strong indicator, is that what we need to reject is we need to reject utilitarianism or any form of morality that really says that all we should really do is really be worried about caring for or empathetic toward, right, another human being or another sentient creature that can either feel pain or have suffering, whether or not there is a identity of those victims or not, right? Because that also solves Tatiana's example, right, about like what do you do in this issue where you have to sacrifice a loved one in order to save the entire world, right? Classic, right, kind of trolley problem, where either your answer is going to be like, well, empathy, right? Like the feminist theorist will say, right, that the only thing that we have to go by is that any type of utilitarian argument just kind of doesn't make any sense. All we can do is since we have a relationship with a particular person with a real identity, then since we have that caring relationship, that then privileges our decision for perhaps saving that one person, even though we may not save the entire world, right? But it doesn't seem clear, right, that I don't really know what the main argument is for that justification, right? Other than evolutionary speaking, right? That's actually our selfish genes have designed us in order for better group survival rates, that we care for our closest kin, right? Obviously, you want to have your DNA spread. Therefore, right, our brains have evolved in order to automatically have a caring function for those that have a sample of our DNA, right? Therefore, I care the most about my son, and I only care half for, well, even half for my sister and half for my son, but I only really care a third for my cousin. I only really care a 100th, right, of someone who has 100th of my potential DNA strand, right? But that, again, that's just the evolutionary functionality that determines why we do have that caring function built into our already moral evolved sensibilities. But that is not a metaphysical moral argument, right? That doesn't give us a clear reason, morally speaking, why we should care for really anybody, whether or not they are related to us.
Vincent, I mean, you're right that consequentialists and Kantians would definitely say that just the fact that we evolved to be a certain way is no argument for why we ought to be that way. They would say no, we reason our way to a moral view, not we were evolved. But there is a moral theory, a competing moral theory, not one of the major ones, but it's called moral sense theory. I think it's related to, like, David Hume. An example would be, who felt that, well, the real basis of morality is our evolutionary makeup. That's the only. We invent these consequentialist and these deontological concerns kind of to rationalize in our heads why we do what we would normally do without those things. Nature made us a certain way to behave, designed us or conditioned us to behave a certain way, and that's the way we're going to behave. We're going to care more about those people near us than those people distant from us. Why? For the reasons you just gave. And that's already built into it. We're built that way. But then morality tries to come in, especially rational, like utilitarians and deontologists, try to give reasons for why we ought to behave a certain way, that try to even say, to modify, if possible. The transhumanists believe that we ought to be rational. Evolution doesn't dictate our future, they would say. That's our basis where we started from, but we can go in a very different direction through the choices we make, either to change the world in which we live, change our environment, so we react differently, or change ourselves. Go ahead.
I think it was raised, the question was about this, who is close to you and how do you relate to the people not too close, was raised by Jesus in Good Samaritan. So basically, who was the Good Samaritan? A person from another tribe, if you remember the Bible, right? So basically, that question is not new, and it was questioned, like how many already, 1,000 years ago. And it means that we do not need to genetically modify people and start looking for the identity crisis to basically continue our search for biblical issues that are eternal, basically eternal. You do not need to believe in all of them, but whatever you touch now was already said or somehow raised in Bible.
Yeah, well, there are competing views about our morality, whether or not what morality, even if you accept it, nature conditioned us to have certain instincts, certain tendencies, certain that are, as you described it, where we care more about ourselves and those people nearest, and increasingly less the further away they get from them. All that's perfectly consistent with an evolutionary understanding of the world. But some people, both religious people and some of the transhumanists who are not religious, say, well, sure, that all that can be true, but that doesn't dictate the future. We can choose to go somewhere else and stop being the evolved creatures. That we can, for example, the utilitarians would say, to give a stark example, and this strikes some people as just wrong-headed, but utilitarians insist this is the right answer. Suppose there's a mother on the beach and she's watching 3 kids who are playing in the water, And one of those kids is hers, and the other two are not hers, but she's watching them. You know, they're playing in the water. And her child is over to the left, and the two children that are not hers are over on the right. And suddenly there's a big emergency where there's a shark infestation or a riptide or something, and she's got to get all the children out of the water fast. But she can't save all three. It's either her child by running over there, or the two children that are not hers by running to the right. And it's a trolley problem. She has to choose between her child and the two children. Consequentialist, a utilitarian would say, the obvious answer is she saves the two, because two lives are better than one. And it should not matter that one child is hers and the others are not hers, because
Or if like
two lives
two
is still
children,
better.
the two children are even closer, like, yeah, say like the two children are even like closer, right? So it's like the triage problem where like, well, I'm going to get to those children faster, and I have a higher probability of saving.
Let me tell you guys, I would love to make a decision, would not like to make a decision for the mother. And obviously you shouldn't make that decision. And no, any philosopher should make that decision. It's mother's decision.
Yeah.
Whatever she chooses, fine. Maybe some mother jumps and grabs whoever is close to her. Some mother will die to save her own child. But what we're talking now, again, I agree that we have choices. And God forbid there is some superpower, either government or some kind of generic manipulation with our brain is trying to make us better or make us indifferent to my personal child towards somebody else. Why do you think all those celebrities are going far away to adopt babies from God knows countries? And they are so famous. Okay, they adopted from Cambodia, from Africa, from everywhere. But they do not even think that next to them, in their own country, there are poor children, children given for adoption, children like literally thrown out. No, it's not publicly that effective. And they care about those in Cambodia. And I'm sure, like, I understand, of course, if you read about something, you feel for them, but you cannot help people on another part of the globe, but you can help somebody who is right next to you. Okay. And that's why with the river and whatever is happening on the river and who is drowning, it's up to this situation.
Right.
So we're trying to generalize absolutely every human instinctive, mental, and moral action. Yeah. But we're different.
Right. Well, what I'm seeing here is that Tatiana, I would classify you the way from what you're saying is you're a type of Aristotelian virtue theorist. From your perspective, like you said, it's the mother's choice. There is no those other two moral theories, utilitarianism and Kantianism, are what's sometimes called rule-based moralities. They have this principle that is supposed to tell you the right answer in all kinds of moral situations. The utilitarians, it's about maximizing the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest number and or minimizing the greatest amount of pain and suffering for the greatest number. For them, it's a very clear choice. There is a right answer to that mother on the beach situation. You save the two, because two lives, every life is equally valuable, whether it's her child or somebody else's child. They're going to see the numbers and they say two is better than one. The right answer is save the two and forget about Europe. That's what they would say.
So now, basically, you agree with, you would rather tell mother what to do?
Yeah, they would say there is a right answer, and the right answer is she should save the two. That's what they would say.
Who are they? Who are they to tell the mother? Totalitarian, yeah.
Well, there are philosophers who would say exactly that.
Yeah.
They say that.
So that's why it's so scary.
Well, but they would say that it's not that they would necessarily force the mother. They're just saying, look, if the mother wants to know what the right thing to do, that is the right thing to do, to save the two. They're not saying that you should punish her if she makes a different choice. Some would say that, but they're making a moral argument, not a legal one. They're just simply saying, if you want to know what the right answer is, it's always saving more.
We're talking about hypothetical examples.
Well,
just for a second, imagine it's a real danger.
Mhm.
And in a real danger, you do not think what is better. Let me weigh 2, 1, 2, 1. You see your child screaming, you run, and that's it. And you
Yeah.
do what you can
Yeah.
do.
Exactly. No, what you're saying. Okay, let me defend your point of view. There are virtue theorists who go back to Aristotle, who would say, no, there is no rule about morality like maximize utility or show respect for rational autonomous beings like the Kantians. No, what the right thing to do is always going to be dependent on the situation you're in. If you're the mother of this child, that matters to your decision. If there were all 3 children were strangers, then none of them were yours. They were all unrelated to you. Then you might agree, save the 2 versus the 1, right? Is that what you would do? Not these, Tatiana?
You know, it's again, I mean, it's very, very artificial situation.
Well, let me
Because you do not know who is closer to you. You do not know how good you're a swimmer. Can you grab 2 or you can grab only 1?
Yeah. Well, let's
talking
assume
like about those crazy women who intentionally had retarded children.
Well, we're trying to do a thought experiment, and we're fixing those things. We assume we do know those things. You know whether these kids are related to you or not. It's just a simple matter of 2 versus 1. Assuming they're not related to you, most people, I think, third parties would look at the situation and said that you'd be culpable if you didn't save the 2 versus the 1.
And then I tell you my question. Okay, there is one child, absolutely innocent, beautiful, I don't know, 3 years old. And if you personally kill him, you will save the whole nation, everybody, not nation, the human being from suffering. And tons of children will not die. Would you kill that child?
Well, what would you do?
And it's a quantity against
do?
just 1.
Well,
a
a utilitarian will have a very simple answer. Yes, you kill the 1 because the alternative is many die. Now, you're saying that you don't agree with that, right?
No, not just me. The very great Russian writer, his name is Dostoevsky, he raised this question about, would you take a blood of the innocent child in your hands in order to save the humanity? And then the whole crime and punishment goes on this question.
Right.
So,
well, I agree. I read Dostoevsky. I read all his novels, the big ones. Yeah, I know what you're talking about, but that actually is.
But you personally, not hypothetically, not in some kind of classroom talking about that. No, go and kill that child.
Right. You're talking about the existential question versus the utilitarian. Existentialists don't have a single moral theory. They don't say, here's the rule that's going to give you the right answer in all situations. They're going to say, it depends on you, who you are, the situation.
That's what I'm saying. And thank God we still have that ability.
That's a point of view on this whole issue, that what you're describing. But there are other points of view. Go ahead, William. Go ahead, William.
Unfortunately, I think on that particular point, I think, unfortunately, the whole of Christianity is based on that premise that one man should die for all souls to be saved, or to that effect, right? So the whole of Christianity is based on the fact of an innocent life to be lost, one innocent life to be lost, so that many should be saved, right? But okay, but that's a different point. But I think I find it personally difficult to know in my mind's eye, to what extent how I actually, put people into, hierarchies of priority, say, right? Now there are, say for example, somebody has a biological child that they've never met, right? And they live in a colony, and they know that this child, an adult now perhaps, thinks in a very different way to them, has very different ideas about life and religion and or politics or whatever it might be, right? They have no relationship with this individual. but they know that their biological child lives in that colony. Then there are, a group of people that this person may know, another colony where there's a group of people who look very much like that person, right? So and then there's a third colony where there's a lot of people who think very much like that person, who agree with the sentiments and beliefs and all of these things, and they may have a relationship with those people, say, for example. Or we could say there's a fourth colony where that person lives, and they have a relationship with the people around them. They may not necessarily look like them. They may not necessarily be biologically related. They may not be necessarily, did I say look like them? Yeah, and they may not necessarily think like they do, right? But they have a relationship with those people because they live there, right? And say, for example, 3 nuclear bombs have to be dropped, one on each colony. Which colony should they drop the bomb on, or choose not to drop the bomb on, a bomb on, say, right? I think I would find it very difficult to know which one not to drop the bomb on, right? If I say, for example, I'm standing afar off, seeing the colony that I have a relationship with people on this island with, I think I would find it difficult to drop the bomb on them because I have a relationship with them. I find it difficult to probably drop the bomb on the people who I share similar ideas with and think in a similar way too. But equally, I've got a biological relation on a different island, but they think in a very different way, and I've never met them. And it becomes that person seems to be a lot less sort of important, even though they are biologically related. I have a relationship with the people I know, and I know there are people who I share similar sentiments with. But obviously, evolutionary theory would, obviously the other people might look like I do, but I have no relationship with them. I don't know what they believe or think, or might disagree with them on that particular point. So it's that kind of feeling of empathy is difficult.
Right.
I
think relationships can be based on different things. I mean, there could be a biological relationship. You can have an affinity relationship that people you identify, your friends might be more important to you than your family. That's not strange or unusual. I know some people who are completely alienated from their family, but identify with their friends. And many other things are some people are.
So when it comes to this trolley problem,
yeah,
right, I think the evolutionary theory would say, oh well, the person would always choose the person that they are biologically related to, and obviously,
yes. During
not
the World
not
War
necessarily.
II,
No, that's the different. It's a different. Yeah, if you're asking a question about whether or not there's an explanation for a moral behavior versus the metaphysical question about whether or not some action is in fact right or wrong. And again, I want to defend the idea of these hypothetical moral questions is to test 2 things: test your moral intuitions and test the already explicitly articulated moral theories that exist. Otherwise, every time you just say, well, there's no reason to explore these hypothetical questions because I wouldn't have any clue what I would do, and it's not fair to put people in those situations. It's what philosophers do in terms of testing whether or not we have a particular belief, and whether or not that intuition, where that intuition comes from, is kind of the question, right? If
so this mother on the beach, and she has to choose one child, right? Obviously, most people say, oh well, they should choose their biological child, but say they don't have a good relationship with them and they have a better relationship with their child's friend, say, for example, for some strange reason, sort of it becomes a bit more it's a lot more complicated than
Well,
just pure
and that's
biology.
why it's good to test that intuition, right? Does that test an intuition about the hierarchy or the level of connection you have with a person? Does that then determine whether or not we can say that a particular action is more or less right or wrong, right? So I mean, the intuition might lead to that. If you even want to have an argument that there are more or less a spectrum of right or wrongs, right? Action, and therefore it's more morally correct to save someone that is closest to you. It's less morally correct as you go down the line, right? So you even have like the spectrum argument that, oh, this is what true morality is. It's based upon that it depends on that particular connection, right? And this is what is sometimes called a contextualist theory, right? Oh, okay, morality then is based upon context, based upon those variables that happen in real time, and our moral intuitions therefore go to a theory that things are right based upon both two things, context and also your relationship. And we're testing
but that's why this whole idea about, do this for the sake of climate change doesn't really work, in the sense that if you were to think, oh, well, the future, it looks like the kids of the next generation think very differently to how I do. They're not like me. I have no relationship with them in one form or another, or I actually don't like them. then why should you give a damn?
Exactly, right? So that's
I agree.
precisely it, right? We're testing that moral intuition, right? That why should we give a damn about people who, and also people who don't exist yet, right? That also at least that kind of that identity problem, right? That if they don't exist yet and we don't even know who they are, how can you then have care for someone who doesn't exist and may not even exist, right? And the problem that we've started with, right, that Victor outlined, is that what if my very actions cause that person to exist, right? So therefore, the people who I do not care about climate change, and therefore I would rather just build as many coal-fired plants as possible. I'm going to create millions of jobs. They're going to have a bunch of babies. They're going to flourish, and those people would not have existed if I didn't, help push a policy that helped push for more.
I think. But I think that's what, obviously, say, for example, the Nazis, right? They had this whole idea of Lebensraum, right? The growing space for the nation, for the genes,
and that's what
whatever it might,
Schwab
so they
told us, that it's
do
too many
whatever's necessary to for the next generation, regardless of what happens to other people. It's a very much. The Nazis were definitely thinking about the next generation. Let's put it that way.
A very specific next generation. They had a very specific identification, right? They still had even if we don't have necessary identity, we have contingent identity based upon a descriptor, right? A descriptor as the next generation is going to be, quote unquote, these features, right?
Yeah, but
and
in a very much in an attack sense, right? But obviously the Allies thought about the next generation too, in a sense. But in a very much defensive of what was currently the paradigm.
Right, and maybe that could lead to perhaps an answer to our non-identity problem, right? Which is, I think, one of the solutions is that our level of care toward the next generations should not be attached to any type of particular identity relation. Meaning that,
and I think that's very difficult to do. I don't think it's
impossible.
But now we're back to the problem, right? So which one is it, right? We still kind of have a problem of, well, if it's impossible to not care about any identity, then it seems like we're still leading to this idea that then what Alice and Barb did was not wrong, and that's actually one of the answers, right? Actually, what Barb does. There's no good theory we can say that what Barb did was anything wrong. And therefore, you have to accept in your moral theory that doing something like choosing a person to exist, even though they're going to have clearly deformities, there's nothing wrong with that. And
Like,
I still
I
haven't heard
think
I still haven't
that-
heard a theory to explain
Okay.
what is wrong with Barbara doing something like that.
So I remember seeing this article from 2002 saying that that there was a lady who, a couple actually, who were both blind, and they wanted to genetically modify that child so that child was blind, right? To what extent, I at that point, I think some people would have a lot more sympathy to that reasoning that, oh, this couple want their child to be like them. Blind, have the similar experiences of life, etc. And would that child know any different, to being blind? No, because they don't know what they've lost.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's an interesting an example of saying that. Well, then you can say the same thing about Barbara, right? Barbara, even though she's not blind, but she has a preference. Her preference is an example is to have a life with a child in which more people are taking care of her. I think that's one of the examples. Like how could we think of a woman to do this? Well, actually, there is a possible world in which the child who has a disability is going to get even more luxuries because they have a disability. Especially
that's
if they,
And another way to look at this. Another way to look at this is not in terms of deciding what the perfect piece of advice is to give to somebody to say for these person. But it's not perfect advice. It's just maybe better considered advice that will help them out in making a decision. And the piece of advice about
Michael, could you put your microphone closer to your mouth, please?
Yeah, your mic, you're hard to hear, Michael.
I'm hard to hear.
Yeah, it's better
Oh,
now.
you're better now. Could you start from the beginning?
Well, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
You can hear me now. All right, I'll turn this around here. I say one way to look at this thing about utilitarian versus deontalectical or is in terms of giving you advice, right? In other words, you put yourself in the position. Somebody comes to you and they ask you, "Well, here's the problem I'm trying to solve. What should I consider?" And so. The way Aristotle answers it, well, you should consider, first of all, you have to separate out what you believe to be certain that applies to every case. He calls that theoretical wisdom, and we call it science, and we've developed the concept quite a bit. The other choice is practical wisdom, because he says that you don't have enough general principles to cover all of the instances, and if you try to apply the general instances, you'll find that there's a lot of conflict, or there could be a lot of conflict, especially as if you could imagine these cases like we're doing. So his solution is practical wisdom. And practical wisdom is the habit of making damn good decisions, whatever they are. And what's a good decision? Well, it's a good decision that gets the best result because it addresses the right person at the right time in the right way. So on and so on, down this big list of all the things that have to satisfy. Then the issue is, well, where do I go to get advice? He says, well, the best person to ask is a moral person who has a lot of practical wisdom.
Yeah, but
so you get the advice, and his advice might be wrong, because he's just dealing with, this might work, that might work, this might work, but you're still stuck with making a decision based
Right.
on a lot of unknowns.
Yeah,
And he
Michael,
separates that off. He separates that off from scientific
right,
knowledge.
right,
Like if you drop two things, one will hit the floor. The heavy one will hit the floor at the right
yeah,
faster than the light than the lighter one. And he was wrong about that, but Galileo, they both
Okay.
hit the ground at the same time.
yeah. Thanks, Michael. But I think what you're describing is Aristotle's virtue theory, which is the idea that yeah, there's no simple rule that's going to give you the right answer, what you're supposed to do. But there seems to be a certain circularity to this view. Like, well, how do you decide what's the right thing to do? Well, Aristotle said you would look around at your community, at the virtuous people that are
Right.
considered virtuous by your community. And then you listen to them, use them as role models, you be like them. But where do they get their virtue? Well, they do the same
But
thing.
they got it from surviving.
And so there's a kind of like each
Yeah,
community,
I got it.
it's a set of
They got it.
mores that are
I
specific.
got it.
Yeah.
In our example, Barbara is a moral philosophy professor. We didn't mention that, did we?
No.
Oh, no.
So Barbara is
Yeah.
a moral philosophy professor, and she's the one who's decided to have this child Tommy. And we didn't really ask her what her justification was for why she thinks it's the right thing to do.
Well, we were
And
talking
know
about
she's-
our. All right.
No, that was just my counterexample. So if Aristotle's looking for the moral person, right? Oh, let's who are the moral virtuous people we're looking for? I guess it's not going to be moral philosophy.
That's not his answer.
Right. Well, I mean,
His answer is this. In Greek, in Athens, in those days, there were wars between the different city-states.
Mhm.
And if one of the city-states won the war against another, they might kill all the people or enslave all the women and children, kill all the men. So losing a war with another city, Athens against Sparta or whatever, was a big deal. It was of essential importance. So was dealing with stormy weather and so on, and catastrophes, plagues. Those were catastrophic things, and you had to deal with them. So he was saying that if the city can't defend itself against its neighbors, it won't survive. There is no city. The cities that are now here in Greece all survived against the cities that disappeared.
right.
So he says the worst thing to be is a slave, because the slave has no control over his life. He doesn't plan his life. He only works for his master's happiness, not for his own.
Right.
His master's supposed to take care of him like a pet. He
Right.
puts that in, a concession to slavery.
Right.
But
So-
the thing is that he, in order to win against the other city, the city that you're in has to win over the population win over the population within the city. And how do you win over the population in the city? Well, you win over the population of the city by making people happy.
Right.
Well,
And survival makes people happy.
survival and comfortable survival, pleasurable, pleasant survival makes them even happier.
Right.
So so that's how he addresses that problem. Now you can say, well, how do you save this? How do you save a city against another city? How do you win over create eudaimonia because eudaimonia exists for individuals.
Yeah.
So you want to create eudaimonia for as many as a magistrate. You want eudaimonia for as many people as possible, individuals.
Yeah.
So
right.
you have a functional relationship.
Right. I want to sum up your view, which I understand. It's the Aristotle's view, and it's basically a community-based one that's based upon whatever your local, the city-state in the case of Athens, whatever allows that community to thrive and survive, and So what is right or wrong is locally determined by your community. There's no such thing as
Not
absolute
not
universal
quite.
right or wrong, because
Not
that
quite,
would-
because
you would have to
because-
take into account all of humanity, which they weren't concerned about all of humanity. They were concerned about their community.
well,
So if you
Well,
stay
well,
within that
Aristotle-
community, you get an answer. You ask the people
Well-
around you, or you look to them for guidance. But
he-
in
but
the
he
modern
also-
world, we have we think of
Yeah.
there's the world, the global situation. We're no longer. I mean, some people still communities, families, smaller
Well,
units still matter, as Tatiana was pointing out, that, or as William too was pointing out. It's very hard, and biologically we are attuned to what's nearest as being more important than what's further away.
Well, I can agree with you halfway.
Well, that's
And
Aristotle.
because he did specify
Yeah,
that as you
But-
could have bad cities and good cities,
right. But
and
since
bad cities were bad at surviving.
right,
Hmm.
but
And
all this is premised-
so that's a different, so among all the cities in the world, the bad cities are bad at surviving. Now, what he did go, where he did, what the part we don't like about his philosophy is that he did say that the Greeks should impose their civilization on the Persians.
right.
He was arguing with Alexander the Great,
Yeah,
and they
Well-
exchanged letters. And
Yeah,
he,
yeah. I need to I want to
Yeah.
conclude, because we're going on for a long time. Yeah, I understand your point of view, Michael, and I understand Aristotle, but one of the criticisms of that view, there are many, but one of them is that it doesn't scale well on especially in a world in which national boundaries or community boundaries are no longer the ultimate standard for what's right or wrong. We kind of want to think there's such a thing as an absolute right or wrong that is applicable to all sentient beings. This is what the utilitarians think, or the deontologists, the Kantians would say, no, it's all those rational beings who can govern their behavior or take action based upon their reasoning processes. They deserve respect. That includes all human beings on the planet and any rational entities anywhere in the universe, as a matter of fact. They're the ones who, what they think collectively, rationally, is what is right or wrong, but like you mentioned about a good community being those that survive. Well, that means that there aren't any bad communities because they didn't survive. They're gone. It's only the only ones existing are the good ones because they have somehow managed to.
we still read Aristotle.
Some are more on their way out than others. Like, for example, there are certain practices, I would say, that some communities have that others don't, which puts them in, I suppose, existential jeopardy, and those communities will vanish, and those practices will vanish with them.
Yeah, but it could be.
But they haven't vanished yet.
Right, and it could be that all communities will eventually.
Well, you're right. You're right that it's a big argument, and Alexander the Great took one side. He ordered his officers to intermarry, to take a Persian wife, and because he wanted to unite the whole world that way.
Mhm.
So he goes way far over that way,
Yeah,
and
one
Aristotle
premise-
goes the other way.
One premise of your argument or the Aristotelian argument, it's not just others as do, is that survival is a good thing. If you drop that premise, and there are some philosophers who say that survival is not all that it's made up to be, that maybe the right thing to do is to become extinct, to literally, that is, there are indeed, I think Molly Gardner in that video mentions them at the very end, and I've actually devoted a whole meetup at one time in the past to the anti-natalist. That David Benatar argues that, morally speaking, we are moving toward extinction, voluntary extinction, not that we're going to commit genocide or kill people, but as we evolve morally, we will come to realize, at least that's how I interpret him, that the right thing to do is for us to literally vanish.
I think those people who come to that conclusion will make themselves extinct. Those people,
You're right.
And any individuals that don't come to that conclusion will continue to propagate themselves onto the future.
You know what I tell someone who tells me that? I was at a party at Berkeley, and one of the students came up and they say, well, I heard you're a Skinnerian. And I said, well, I think he had a few things to say. And he says, well, he didn't believe in it. So I said, he didn't believe in determinism because he always, reality is what he chose reality to be.
Mhm.
And so I said, okay. So I brought him over to the window and I said, you really believe that? He said, yes. Okay. There's the window. I opened the window
Yeah.
for him.
Right.
And he started to punch me in the face because
Well,
because I was insulting him in front of his friends.
the antinatalists, I mean, let me defend them a little bit. What William said, that yes, if people genuinely believe that, they're going to weed
Right.
themselves out of the gene pool because they're not going to reproduce because they don't believe it's right to reproduce, right?
Right.
Okay.
Enough of them.
What you're
Yeah.
making, what you're saying there is you're predicting that given these values, this is what's going to happen. You're giving a description
Right.
of the future.
Exactly.
However, it doesn't address the moral question: ought people to make themselves vanish? Just because they won't, in actuality, is no
Yeah,
argument
but
they should.
he also
That's all I
based on
need.
what you said. You said
For my
he
morality,
predicts
that's all
that
I need.
as we morally evolve,
Yeah.
people will. But what I'm saying is that not
But they
all of us
won't.
will morally evolve in that direction, and
Well,
some will be behind others,
oh, that's
and
true.
some will never get to that point.
Well, see, that last
Yeah.
point is where they would disagree. That some will get there sooner than others, that I can believe. But the point is that
There's no Darwinian selection pressure for it. Let's put it that way.
well, to the extent that morality is itself, that Darwin determines the future, but that's precisely what is a question here, whether evolution determines the future.
It requires a significant amount of intellect to be able to comprehend that. And
Yes.
many people do not have the potential to actually comprehend
I
it.
absolutely agree with you. That's
And they
now,
never will, because the people who with the genes who can comprehend such a thing will not pass their genes on.
Okay. Okay. Well, if you're right, you're predicting the antinatals will disappear like a bad mutation.
It happened to it's happened before, and Daniel Dennett has, in many of his lectures, has pointed out one such group who believes such a thing. They were a Christian sect, the Shakers, and we know them from their furniture, right? But they were antinatalists. They do not believe in having children,
Right.
And their sect no longer exists.
But there are those who point to trends, even by people who are not doing this for philosophical reasons. It's just happening empirically. In countries like India, for example, the population is dropping, and not because of philosophy. People are literally, as they become more educated, as the quality of life improves, family sizes are dropping, and they're dropping below the level of replacement. And so even without any philosophy involved, this may be the
Right.
It's the people whose minds are more likely to be infected by the mimetic complex that wealth and keeping up with the Joneses is more important than one's genetic survival, right? For some communities, their minds are better infected because not everybody has the same brains, right? We're not all born the same. Different communities have different ways of thinking about things innately, in my opinion. And some of some communities innately believe that children are wealth, right? Other communities believe that how much you have is wealth, and some communities believe both are. So, for example, the super wealthy, Elon Musk, etc., Mormons, etc., right? Or I'm going to say the Mormons are super wealthy, but another group that believe that children are wealth, that religion tells them such, right? In the hereafter, Muslims and likewise believe the same thing. Catholics used to, and I suspect many more traditional Catholics, that those are prone to it, traditional Catholicism, believe the same thing. Their minds are not based on inherently upon material things. But Elon Musk's, he cares about wealth, of course, but two, he doesn't really care about it in and of itself. He cares about it in what he can do with it, right? He wants to go to Mars, whatever, right? But also, likewise, he cares about having a lot of children, and he has had a lot of children himself. And many, say, for example, politicians in Parliament in the UK, right? One of them's called Mogg is Jacob Rees-Mogg, and he's had a number of children, right? And he's a Catholic man, right? His religion dictates, but he is likewise some sort of financier, right? So where those two things collide, where both wealth and intelligence and the belief that propagating oneself into the future is important, those are the ones who will inherit the earth.
Okay. Well, you may be describing the future, what will actually happen. It still doesn't touch the question of what ought to happen. It's a big difference between what
it's a different question altogether. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Now, the ought question is supposedly a moral question, not you're describing future evolution. If you talk about future evolution, for example, you mentioned it takes a great deal of intellect to come to this Benatarian idea, and doesn't describe the world today. But unless you have a vision of the future, the evolutionary development of our species as being static, it's going to reach a certain level and it's never going to get better than that. Or do you imagine that this intelligence, its intellectual level, will continue indefinitely until it comes to where most people agree with Benatar, and they say, our species has lived long enough. It's time, just like a person in their ordinary life might say, I'm getting too old, it's time to go. That we will eventually, as a species, come to that same conclusion. We've had enough, it's time to go. It seems to me that could be an end game to all this. And so
no, I very much doubt it. There's always a minority group, even if the majority, of lemmings,
So a consequence of what you're saying is that this will go on indefinitely forever. Humanity.
No, I mean there may be natural causes to death, not just because the person chooses to commit suicide, right?
All right.
Okay.
So your vision of the end of humanity is that we will never voluntarily disappear, but we might be wiped out by some other thing. Is that
or not intentionally due to wanting to remove ourselves from the surface of the earth? Yeah.
Or another option, which is the transhumanist, is that we won't commit species suicide. We will transform into something completely different, and we will survive, and then that will transform into something complete, and so on forever, until something wipes us all out, if anything ever does. Elon Musk is a good example. He's trying to colonize Mars. He would like to colonize all the planets, the solar system, the universe. The idea is more is better.
The Mormons have the same idea. Many Muslim groups, many Orthodox Jews, you name it. All the people of the of faith, many of them of Orthodox persuasion, and also the eugenicists, likewise, who are of a form of Orthodox faith, we could say.
So the entire universe should be filled with humanity if we can pull it off.
But those are the ones that will find a way to continue, and the ones coupled with the intelligence and the ability at the same time to do so. Right. So.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Honestly, I don't think we should take into consideration that most people don't even think about it. They just have children because they, I don't know, want to have someone to take care of them when they get old. They don't even go into that.
Right.
No, I think some people do it for cultural reasons. They just because something to do. Parents are expecting grandchildren, or that kind of thing.
So much more to it.
Or accidents happen, and that was obviously the original reason that children came into the world, because of accident rather than due to any intention, really. So I think as people choose to have children, the selection pressure is on now for those who choose to and those who choose not to. Increasingly, because of things like contraception, it will separate those who choose to and those who choose not to, it will remove many people who choose not to from the gene pool because they actively choose not to do so.
Well, I think that, I mean, first of all, what you describe is that, yes, the people who right now have already reached the realization that it's better off, like Benatar, who thinks that we'd be better off not to exist, and offers a really, I think, a reasonable argument for why that is. But will most of humanity be convinced by it? I agree with you, it's unlikely. But ought they to be convinced by it is another question. And it's possible that, as you mentioned earlier, that we will eventually evolve the intelligence and the intellectual conscience to realize that he's right. But it's not going to
No,
happen.
I don't believe that. I don't.
So you don't
think
believe it's right at all?
No, I said intelligence is necessary, but it's not sufficient to come to that conclusion. There's something else that's necessary to come to that conclusion, which is innate, potentially innate form of misanthropy.
Oh, misanthropy. You don't think?
Yeah, misanthropy plus intelligence.
You don't think it's possible to come to, because there's an argument that says this is out of human compassion that he thinks that we're better off.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise, for example, Buddhists would have come to this conclusion, but they haven't wiped themselves off the face of the planet yet. You know, they obviously believe that life is suffering, etc., etc. Why hasn't Buddhism, you know, taught? Oh, actually, it's not a good thing for any Buddhists to have children, but yet Buddhists continue to have children.
Yeah, that's because there are biological forces that are very powerful out there, and they override our philosophies. That even Benatar agrees with that. There's very strong inclinations to reproduce, and a few people here and there might choose not to, but humanity as a whole is going to continue until.
But why do they persist to call themselves Buddhists? You know,
what?
sort of. Why do they continue to persist to call themselves Buddhists?
Because they're hypocrites. I'm serious, because I mean, you can have a philosophy that says you ought to do this, but you don't do it because there's just too much pulling you in some other direction. Christianity, they're all the same. The Christianity, there's an idea. Nietzsche's famous statement about Christianity says there's only ever been one Christian, and he died on the cross. Everybody else was a faker. You know,
I'm not sure about that, but
well, it's because he had super high standards.
I don't think Jesus was not a Christian. He was a nice Jewish boy, I think, from Galilee.
Okay. All right. Well, I think it's
the problem is that there may be a trend that you described where some people, to a certain extent, believe that the human race has had enough. But working against that is the fact that in order to get to that point, to survive to that point, they have to develop an enormous amount of survival skills, and that's why they survive. So that principle works against them coming to the conclusion that they should die. Just a sheer biological material fact that they did survive, and in order to survive, they had to be so biased towards developing these survival skills. Now, it is true that we probably are going to disappear, and it maybe in the next 50 years or so. That's just a wild opinion. You know, you can take it or leave it, but it's going to be nuclear war, or the weather, or an asteroid crashing into the Earth, and we're not ready to destroy it. There's a lot of possibilities that if we don't take certain actions, that's going to happen. But people are not taking not taking those seriously because they don't believe it'll happen.
I think what people confuse is the human species and modernity. I think moderns, people who embrace modernity, believe that the human race, because they assume everyone is modern, has had enough, right? But most people, I would say, are not moderns, not in that structure. Yeah, modernity definitely comes to the conclusion, and people who are innately attracted to modernity definitely come to the conclusion that, yeah, it's time to end it all. Yeah, but
speaking of
humanity is
ending it
not
all,
modernity. Yeah,
Well,
that's right.
I'm
Yeah,
a
that's
modern,
right.
and I'm a modern, and I don't come to that conclusion.
Yeah,
Well,
And
okay. So we
uh,
have to end
you
it
might
all
not be
right
as
now.
modern as you think,
Yeah.
but anyway. Yeah. Anyway, lovely chatting, Victor. Lovely chatting,
Okay,
Michael.
okay.
Thank
Yeah, I
you very
wanted
much.
to, thanks all of you guys for sticking
Yeah,
around
thanks
this
for being
long,
here.
and I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
I hope you
having me.
guys come back. All right, okay, so see you
Bye.
later. Bye.
bye.